one?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep. Nobody said that to us.
Why is this doing this?
If I can get our gentleman to quit talking and sit down. I am happy to reconvene the Monterey County Board of Supervisors meeting for Tuesday, April 26th at 1:30. And if we could please have a roll call.
Yes, Madam Chair, let the record reflect Supervisor Phillips, Supervisor Askew, and Chair Supervisor Adams are present in the board chambers, with Supervisor Alejo and Supervisor Lopez present via Zoom.
Thank you very much. And if we could please have our announcement by our Spanish interpreter, Diego Celis. Oh, no, I forgot.
No.
Por favor, hablar lenta y lo suficientemente fuerte para que yo lo escuche. Favor hacer una pausa al final de sus oraciones para asegurarme de que tengo la oportunidad de interpretarlo claramente. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Celis. And now we're going to have our first scheduled matter of the day. And this is to receive a presentation on the Monterey County Children's Council, the fiscal year 2021 annual report from Council Chair Lori Medina. And we are also seeing that we have our Director of Health, Elsa Jimenez, and it looks like Sonia Kohler to me. Great to see you all here.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, members of the public. Lori Medina, Director of Social Services, and also serving as this year's chair for the Children's Council. With me, as you've mentioned, the Department of Health Director, Elsa Jimenez, who was the immediate past chair of the Children's Council, and she'll actually be providing the annual report for that period. And also Sonia Kohler, our Director of Bright Beginnings. So without any further ado.
Great. Thank you, Director Medina. It's my pleasure to be here today presenting our Monterey County Children's Council 2020-2021 annual report. As you may recall from previous years, we come once a year to really provide a highlight of what is happening in our community with respect to our children and youth. And this is really meant to be used as a snapshot that really documents the status and hopefully helps to inform local policy decisions that we need to be considering. Next slide. The annual report has 4 goals. As I mentioned, it serves as a benchmark to see how our children and youth are faring over time, hopefully serves as a catalyst to mobilize our community stakeholders, community residents, and others to really address these challenges that our children and youth are facing. And has also in the past year served as a bridge to really stimulate interest in forming new initiatives. And at the end, we'll hear from our most recent initiative, Bright Beginnings by Sonia Kohler. Next. Our annual report has a total of 30 indicators. You will notice if you read the report that 2 indicators were removed from this year. Our childhood obesity and our physical fitness indicators were removed. And this is because these are 2 metrics that are no longer being utilized in the school systems for evaluating this. There is a state movement to try to come up with a different physical fitness indicator. And as you may recall, the last couple of years, our children have have been in distance learning. And so these are the physical fitness measure, even if kids were not able to be measured. So these two metrics will no longer appear in our report. And we added 3 new indicators. As we all know, the pandemic has challenged our communities and continues to challenge our communities. And there were some glaring disproportionate impacts that we were seeing in our community resulting from the pandemic. And so we want to highlight 3 of those in our report with respect to digital divide, suicide rates in our youth, and substance abuse disorders, non-fatal and fatal overdoses in our youth. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, 1 slide back, please. This is just a summary of the indicators that I'm going to be highlighting for you. And the reason that we have selected these is because these are the ones that we have recent data to be able to report on. Unfortunately, the other indicators where data was not collected, and therefore you will see in the report just a carry forward of prior year data. Next. The first indicator that I'm going to highlight for you today is children supported by CalWORKs. The trend for the number of children supported by CalWORKs has really been consistent since 2017 in our county and across the state. We saw case transfers or closures because customers moved out of the area, unfortunately, due to the cost of living, the chilling effect due to public charge that has impacted many of our residents, and then, of course, during the pandemic. Additionally, the unemployment insurance benefit stimulus either made people they didn't need to apply, or the amount may have disqualified them from benefits. So those are some of the reasons that we think we saw a sharp decline from 2019 to 2020. Next. Children living in poverty. Again, we don't know really quite what may be happening here, but we do think that it's similar circumstances related to what I pointed in the previous slide, or individuals really not wanting to be identified. This measure is a census measure, which uses an outdated federal measure of poverty, and it doesn't account for the really extremely high cost of living in California and in our county. And the majority of our residents pay more than 30% of their annual income on housing. In addition, expansion of earned income tax credit and minimum wage may make it appear people are faring better than they actually are. Next. Regarding the metric for referrals of child abuse and neglect, we see fluctuations since we started to report this. In the period from 2015 to 2017, we saw a marked increase related to increased awareness and policy changes about how we screen cases. Between 2017 and 19, referrals were up and down, but then eventually leveled off. Then we started to see a bit of a decline. We believe the decline since 2020 are attributed to the pandemic and the fact that children were not in schools in person. The largest proportion of referrals do come from mandated reporters, such as personnel in the schools and our teachers. Next. We continue to see declines in the rate of children in foster care in our county for a couple of reasons. First, policy changes statewide regarding the placement of children and moving away from institutional care. And secondly, a greater focus on providing services in the home, including voluntary services. And lastly, the results of the pandemic with lower referrals resulting in lower placements. According to our personnel at social services, more of our families are voluntarily engaging in case management, which is really what we want to see because we want to keep our children in their home. Next. Economically disadvantaged students are defined as those who are eligible to receive free or reduced meal program or have a direct certification for the free and reduced meal program, or who are migrant, homeless, or foster youth, and where neither of the parents have a high school degree. Knowing the size of population in question here really helps us to scale and scope efforts to support the population and the services that they need. You know, poverty is highly correlated with academic achievement and success in life. Next. There has been an increase in the number of homeless students. This can be in part attributed to refinements in our local practices at some of our school districts and how they collect the information from students and families to determine eligibility under McKinney-Vento. So this will continue to be a metric that we will continue to monitor here at the local level to determine what additional programming or services need to be provided for these families. Again, if we are improving our means of collecting data, we could see that we might have a more reflective count of really the number of students in our community that are experiencing homelessness. Next. Our next slide shows a new metric that we incorporated because of the disproportionate impacts we were seeing from the COVID pandemic. This new indicator was included, as I mentioned, to assure that we continue to monitor this as we shift from recovery to from response to recovery for COVID impacts. As we know, the shelter in place and distance learning requirements really surface the significant digital divide that exists in our community. Californians really rely on the internet for a variety of things, for financial services, telecommuting, job searches, online classes, training. And what we saw during the pandemic is that many of our communities did not have sufficient broadband at their house or even in their community to really meet the needs of multiple children and perhaps parents working from home. And so this will be a measure that we will continue to monitor locally. And as you know, that there are local and statewide efforts to really close the digital divide in our communities, particularly for our communities of color. Next. With respect to public school enrollment, it is declining. This is due to a decreasing birth rate, as well as some families anecdotally choosing not to enroll their children in school during the pandemic. And this will be a measure that we will continue to monitor, particularly if additional vaccines are mandated for our school-age children. Anecdotally, we are hearing that there may be fewer students willing or able to enroll in our public school system. Next. There has been an increase in the number of special education students enrolled in our schools. This parallels a national trend where we're seeing the percentage of students being identified for special education. Again, it could be that we are improving our processes to be able to identify these children, again, with the goal of making sure that we provide the appropriate services for these children and their families so that they are able to achieve education, their educational goals. Next. With respect to English language learners, these are students whose parents report a primary language other than English on a survey that they complete. Those who lack English language skills based on the state-approved assessment in listening, comprehension, speaking, reading, and writing, which we know are really necessary to succeed for success in the school system. We are seeing kind of decreasing with respect to those that are enrolled, and then an increase in those that are reclassified from English as language learners to just the regular student body. Next. We have one metric here that we wanted to highlight with respect to teen births. As we all know, the impact of giving birth as a teen can have negative consequences for both the mother and the child. Teen mothers are less likely to complete high school or college and are more likely to require public assistance and live in poverty than their peers who are not mothers. On a positive note, our teen birth rate for the 15 to 19-year-old females is progressively declining since 2012. Although it is declining, we need to continue to invest efforts that support our young females in economically disadvantaged communities to further reduce the teen birth rate in this age group. Our rate is about 24 per 1,000, which is slightly higher than the statewide average. So this is a metric that as a Children's Council and as a health department, we'll continue to monitor and see what additional strategies and interventions need to be implemented to further support our girls and attaining different outcomes for themselves. Next. With respect to juvenile misdemeanor and felony arrests, we continue to see a steadily decline over the past decade, a trend that really mirrors that of the state of California. The declining arrest rates are likely due to a combination of legislative and local policy changes and an increased focus on delinquency prevention and early intervention. Again, COVID and associated response actions such as the shelter in place and distance learning environments really created fewer opportunities for individuals to congregate, which likely played a key role in the drastic reduction in misdemeanor arrests seen in our county between fiscal year 20 and 21. Next. As part of the response to the pandemic, many high schools found themselves in a circumstance where they had to adopt pass-fail grading options. This, along with other policy decisions, facilitated students continuing to graduate at similar or higher rates in Monterey County in the last year. Next. And I hope you appreciate this slide. Because of the global pandemic, again, the majority of the students participated in education through distance learning formats. In general, suspensions were not appropriate nor necessary for students learning through those formats. It'll be interesting to see as our students have resumed in-person instruction, what the trend will be for the current fiscal or school year when we report next year. Next slide. With respect to expulsion rates, similarly, again, because of the pandemic and students being distance learning environments, expulsions were something that was not considered in the last school year. Next. Our student dropout rate. Again, I mentioned in a previous slide that many of our schools adopted pass, no pass grading options. And so this could have contributed to the student dropout rate staying a little bit lower than it was in the prior year. Where conversely, you can see that California's went up. Down. Next slide. Now, this is another new metric that we are going to be including in our children's annual report. As we know, suicide is a serious public health problem across the nation, in California and here locally, and it has really long-lasting effects on individuals, families, and communities. The COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated the overall mental health challenges for many of our children and youth as a result of isolation, fear, stress, and uncertainty. As you can see here, this is data for 2020. 19% of our deaths by suicide were to children aged 0 to 17. And then 50% of suicides attempts seen in our emergency departments were for our children and young adults aged 13 to 25 years of age. Although it is a lower percentage, from years prior, it is something that we definitely need to continue to monitor as a community and ensure that our children have the supports that they need to be able to build resilience, that we make sure we're building protective environments for them, that we're strengthening economic support for our families, that we're increasing awareness of mental health and suicide risk factors, and more importantly, increasing access and delivery of mental health care services for our children and families in need. Next. Again, a new metric that we want to report going forward. This indicator shows the trends of emergency department visits for overdose in Monterey County youth over this time period. All drug overdose emergency department visits caused by non-fatal poisonings due to the effects of drugs, regardless of intent. Emergency department visits related to late effects, adverse effects, and chronic poisonings due to the effects of drugs are excluded from this indicator. And what we see here, particularly for our 15 to 19 year olds in our county, there was an uptick between 2018 and 2020. And it again is another indicator that we will continue to monitor as a community. And then next slide, with respect to substance abuse disorders and fatal overdoses. This is a crude rate per 100,000. And you can see for the 15 to 19-year-olds, again, a sharp increase from 2018 to 2020. And this indicator is really reflective of the lives lost due to drug overdose in our teens and our young adults. And so I don't want to end on a negative note there. I do think that COVID created an opportunity for us to hone in on new indicators that we should be monitoring on an annual basis. Again, more importantly, so that it informs policy decisions, investments, and strategies and services so that we can continue to support our young children, our youth, and our families. In our report, you will also see previous initiatives and areas of focus of the Children's Council. And today, next slide, I'm pleased to present Sonia Kohler, who will provide our annual update on Comienzos Brillantes, or our Bright Beginnings initiative.
Thank you, Elsa. And good afternoon, Chair, Supervisors, and my fellow constituents. I'm honored and delighted to be here in person to share some of the highlights of the Bright Beginnings Early Childhood Development Initiative for the year 2020 to 2021. I'm Sonia Kohler, Director of Bright Beginnings, an initiative of the Children's Council. With the wise guidance of our advisory group of 20 plus diverse leaders in the field, and co-chairs Dr. Ed Moreno, the county's health officer, and Francine Rod, executive director of First Five Monterey County, countless partners across the county collectively advance this work on a daily basis. And I'm going to ask to please go back to the first slide. We're near the end here. Perfect. Thank you. And I wanted to be sure that you saw this inspiring face. Sometimes folks think of children as our future leaders. I really think that they are the true leaders of the work we're doing today. So next slide, please. So the initiative's goal is to ensure that all children have the holistic supports they need. We believe that the color of a child's skin or where a child was born or lives should not determine their success. All children deserve equitable opportunity. We clearly saw the need for this initiative by the results of past kindergarten readiness assessments, which tell us that only 1 in 4 children in Monterey County are assessed as ready for school. Last year, the cross-agency team concluded a process of reworking the assessment to focus on a different kind of readiness. Instead of asking if children are ready for school, we instead ask if our systems are ready for children. This allows us to center race, equity, diversity, and inclusion in how programs are designed and administered. We strive to meet children and their families where they are and to narrow the equity gap to universally raise the readiness of children in Monterey County. Despite setbacks due to COVID, we are set to roll out the assessment this fall and look forward to sharing that data with you next spring. Next slide, please. In order to transform the systems that touch the lives of young children and that hold inequities in place, we look at 6 factors. The more visible structures like policies, practices, or resource flows, and I apologize, the typo got corrected, wonderful. And the more implicit items, the invisible connections, relationships, power dynamics, and mental models that guide our work. Next slide. So the following organizational framework of collective impact, we recognize that it takes all of us working around a common agenda to create that kind of transformational change. And so we have these 5 areas that define our common agenda and drive our work. A fair system of early learning and education, coordinated holistic services and policies so that families are supported and resilient, caregivers and service providers who are appropriately informed, and that we have the collective capacity to do this work through training, civic engagement, and sustainable funding. You might ask, what does all this nicely packaged frameworking actually look like in our community? Next slide. Here we can see the projects that the Bright Beginnings Backbone team supports, arranged by the strategies we just looked at. In addition to these, there are many more projects that our partners lead, like the First Five Early Childhood Collaboratives, the MCOE-led Quality Matters, United Way's Preschool Corps, and Building Healthy Communities advocacy work in schools, just to name a few. I won't be able to cover all that was accomplished through the Bright Beginnings initiative last year. I will highlight a few handful of the stories of resiliency in a very difficult year of disruption for everyone as we mourn loss personally and collectively. We'll feel it for a while yet, especially young children who are in their most formative years. What we as systems leaders, community members, parents do now can and will make a difference for their better. Next slide. The first thing you might notice is this slide looks very different than the tidy boxes and circles we've been looking at. It looks a lot like the kind of messy reality of our lives, colorful, overlapping, and perhaps at time a bit busy. This is the work of Bright Beginnings. When we take a look, we see stories of resiliency emerge. We see our change projects in action, reinforcing each other for greater impact and transformation. So let's dive in the next slide, please. We'll start with the photos here at the bottom, Greenfield Early Learning Partnership. Undeterred by COVID, they held their annual Kinder Festival for enrollment, moving from the indoor booth model to the outdoor drive-through and walk-up model. It was wildly successful. 250 families rolled through, way up from the 150 in the previous year. Each family received packets of enrollment and early childhood related information and shelter and play kits from First Five, My Museum, and TAMC. If needed, direct support to begin the enrollment process was provided on site. At the top left, we see the work of the Mamás de Salinas Abogan. The Mamás expanded their circle of support, almost doubling, and engaged deeply in training for various types of policy and advocacy work and put their learning into action. Last spring, in the Alisal Union School District, as in most districts, enrollment in early learning programs was very low. We are seeing a similar trend for this next school year. Parents were not only hesitant to enroll in the midst of COVID, they also were more disconnected from schools and therefore the enrollment process. So during Alisal's first ever enrollment fair, the Mamás showed up to engage directly with parents peer-to-peer to walk them through understanding their options and applying. And a spoiler alert, you'll likely hear from a couple of our Mamás during public comment. Moving to the top right, I had to make sure if I got my right. The Maternal Mental Health Task Force grew to include 60 individuals representing 22 agencies. The task force is chaired by the health department and also a lot of participation through CSUMB and First Five and their steering committee. The task force was awarded a grant from Central California Alliance for Health to support capacity building in screening and treating perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, developing an online training with 175 local attendees. They also supported cross-agency referrals through Beacon, held a training for WIC, launched an illustrated series of local stories by new parents, and supported the county's first resolution for Maternal Mental Health Week. Another spoiler alert, that resolution will come to these chambers again next week. And in May, please keep your radios dialed in to Radio Bilingue, iHeart, and KAZU for a trilingual radio campaign in English, Spanish, and Triqui. Next slide. We broaden our family-friendly business work to focus on relationship building and embedding early childhood needs into emergency and economic development plans. We published several articles and ads in the Salinas Valley Business Journal. We also participated in the county's economic development plan needed to apply for federal funds, integrating early childhood needs, and as well the Regions Rise Together inclusive economic planning effort. Next slide. Through all stages of the pandemic, the Response and Recovery Coalition continued to support the essential work of childcare and well-being. Weekly, we held coordination meetings and published an e-digest full of news and resources for early educators and caregivers, the first of its kind. As someone from Good Shepherd Preschool told us, I'm subscribed to the weekly digest, and it is amazing in all caps. It has been super helpful and is really well organized. Thank you for keeping us so connected and pointing out amazing opportunities like the retention stipend. The Response and Recovery Coalition also developed a holistic programmatic pathway for recovery for children and families. In the spring of last year, we brought a portion of that plan, focusing on childcare and education, to these chambers for consideration for ARPA funding. We thank you for your unwavering support at that time last year. I could go on about the work of the coalition and Bright Beginnings, but there are just 4 more things I'd like to share before wrapping up. Number 1 was the vaccination effort. Working with MCOE, First 5, MAOF, and other partners, we were able to hold several clinics in Salinas and Greenfield. Of note was how this team helped to break down barriers to access to the vaccine. For example, Centro Binacional reached out to the indigenous families and provided interpretation in multiple languages at the clinic in Greenfield. The Visiting Nurses Association agreed to simplify registration to include self-attestation as we could. And they even did some home visits for those that couldn't come to the clinic. Next slide. So number 2 is www.montereycountychildcare.org. It's the central hub for all things childcare for both parents and educators. This is where we could get information out into the field real time. We know that we were actually reaching folks through this site. During key moments of change in the pandemic, we jumped from a monthly average of 250 new users to 1,250 new users. Please share this resource in your districts. That's montereycountychildcare.org. So number 3, the next slide. We collectively supported several hundred of the informal childcare providers, the family, friends, and neighbors that provide care to about 70% of families in Monterey County. With Go Kids, Capslo, United Way, and First 5, we provided resources to about 150 FFN, including cash, play groups, and mental health supports through reflective practice, which is still ongoing. Here on the slide, we see a clip from a video by FFN. Local Solis Policy Institute fellows Daisy Hernandez from Capslo, an FFN playgroup leader, and Bright Beginnings Iris Gamez helped FFN share their story of caring for children during the era of remote learning. To help raise awareness of the crucial role FFN play in children's education, they presented this to the Alisal Union School District's Board of Trustees. Let's see if we can listen to, if we're lucky, when the slide is clicked, we'll hear the clip. Let's see if that works. Maybe not. I'll give a pause in case there's something technically that can change. Otherwise, I'll make sure you have the URL for that clip. It's really lovely. It's one of those things that brings tears to my eyes to hear how hard everyone wraps around children to make sure they were able to thrive, hopefully thrive through the pandemic, addressing distance learning and other things that were going on. And these family, friends, and neighbors who did that hard work rarely get the attention that they need, the resources they need, and we're proud to support them. And again, more on that in next year's annual report. So we'll go to the next slide. Maybe we'll go to the next slide. Well, if we saw the next slide, we'd see a map of Monterey County colored in turquoise, in different shades of turquoise. And in each shade is a zip code. And then we also have the districts of the county. Here we go. So again, we see the districts, your districts mapped out onto here. What we see here is access to childcare across the county. So it might look like data, but what this is really about are the deepening relationships within the early learning sphere here in Monterey County. Because in order to get information and data, we need to have trusted relationships. So underlying all that work through the coalition, our relationships deepened. Our communications between agencies and childcare and education providers, and with families in the community has gotten even better. This paves the way to collect and report and act on information in ways that meet the needs of our families the best. And so I end with one last spoiler alert for next year's annual report. There will be more of this kind of data coming soon as we work on our master plan for facilities. So just to show here in this peak, we have only 20% of children ages 0 to 4 who have access to licensed childcare across the county. And if you are interested in more details, you can find this on our website. And at the bottom right, click here and you'll get pages and pages of data. And again, there's more like this to come in the next months. Next slide. And the last slide. So yes, last year was a doozy in many ways. Yet we had, as an initiative, as partners working together, the audacity to collectively pull together like never before, all sectors, all disciplines, to make big change for the systems that support our youngest. What I shared is a fraction of what we accomplished. You can read more in the full report. And to recover from the still ongoing triple pandemics of COVID, climate change, and racism, we still have a lot of heavy lifting ahead of us. But it's smiles like this one on the slide that gets us through. Thank you for all your support to ensure our youngest constituents and their families have what they need to thrive.
Thank you so much for your report and the presentation. The Children's Council has long been special in my heart, so I'm very thankful for the work that I see going on and the leadership that it takes to be able to ensure that that things happen within it. So I thank you both very much for the presentation. And the first thing I'll do is see if there are any members of the board that wish to ask questions at this point. And I'm going to go out and see if there's any member of the public that wishes to ask any questions or make any comments at this point. Checking my signs here. Well, I for one have, do you have your hand up, Wendy? I didn't see it, but go ahead. I'm not seeing anybody in the public coming forward. I'm not seeing any hands raised. Somebody, do you see any hands raised? Maria Carmen-Pata, you would be able to make your comments if you press *6 to unmute yourself. There we go. And you would have 2 minutes to make your comments, Maria.
Thank you. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es María Parra y esta vez voy a hablar en nombre de Graciela Alfaro, miembro de la comunidad que no puede estar aquí hoy, pero quería compartir su situación. Mi nombre es Graciela Alfaro. Soy madre soltera de 3 hijos. Estoy aquí dando mi experiencia de las barreras que he tenido para encontrar cuidado de niños accesible.
My name is Maria Alfaro. I'm here to talk to you about the accessible services to the children in this area.
Yo trabajo en el campo y me he visto en la necesidad de parar de trabajar porque no tengo quien cuide mis niños.
I'm a field worker and I've been in the need to stop working because I don't have childcare.
He ido a varios programas de guarderías como MAOF y me dicen que no soy elegible para el programa porque no tienen suficientes fondos.
I've been to other childcare providers such as Now, and they told me that I'm not available because they have other requirements.
Yo no gano lo suficiente para ir a un sector privado o con proveedoras con licencia porque
I
el
don't earn
costo,
enough to go to a private nursery or to a licensed childcare provider
porque el costo es muy caro y no gano lo suficiente.
because it is a high cost and I don't earn enough.
Así que pido por favor se den fondos para todas esas personas que como yo no tenemos los suficientes recursos.
So I'm asking you for funds to those people like myself that don't have enough resources
Para pagar el cuidado de niños accesible.
in order to have childcare accessible.
Hoy en día todo ha subido de precio y el cuidado de niños está súper alto.
Nowadays, everything's gone up in price and the childcare has been super high.
De antemano, gracias a todos por pensar en madres y en niños como yo, con respeto,
Beforehand, I'd like to thank mothers to think about children and myself.
con respeto, Graciela Alfaro. Gracias.
Sincerely, Graciela Alfaro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Our next speaker is Alma Laredo. Your hand is raised. If you would like to speak, you will have 2 minutes to make your remarks.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. Voy a hablar en español.
Sí,
Buenas
adelante.
tardes, presidente de la mesa, supervisores.
Hello, my name is Alma Loredo, and I'd like to address the Monterey County Board of Supervisors.
Yo soy madre de 3 hijos y residente de la ciudad de Salinas.
I'm a mother of 3 children and a resident in the city of Salinas.
Y soy un líder comunitario y miembro de los concilios escolares en las escuelas de mis hijos.
I'm a member of the community leaders, as well as the children's school.
Y soy parte del grupo de mamás de Salinas Abogan bajo la iniciativa de Bright Beginnings.
I'm part of the group of mothers in Salinas under the initiative of Bright Beginnings.
Desde hace 5 años aproximadamente he sido miembro activo del grupo de mamás de Salinas.
I've been an active member for 5 years of the group Mamas in Salinas.
A través de este grupo hemos podido concientizar a padres y a personas en sistemas
Through this group, we've been able to develop conscience among parents
y distritos y sistemas
as well as systems in the districts
de lo importante que es que todos los niños reciban educación a edad temprana de calidad.
about the importance of children receiving early education programs,
De calidad.
quality education programs.
Los resultados de nuestra abogacía se han visto reflejados en la comunidad,
Our results have been reflected in our community,
en algunos de los distritos escolares, como el distrito de Alizal,
in some of the school districts, such as the Alizal district,
donde nos hemos presentado y hemos abogado por más inversión
where we have asked and requested more investment
en preescolar y apoyo en salud mental para niños en la edad temprana.
for preschool programs, as well as mental health for kids in the young age programs.
Sin embargo, esto no se lograría sin el liderazgo de las madres
However, this would not be possible without the leadership of the mothers
y los abogados comunitarios que han estado presentes apoyando.
and the community advocates who've been present lobbying for us.
Esto ha sido crítico en nuestras diferentes oportunidades de abogacía
This has been a critical part in the part of asking for advocacy,
que hemos sido parte en este tiempo.
of which we've been part throughout this time.
Así que esta tarde les pido que sigan invirtiendo en esta iniciativa de Bright Beginnings
Therefore, I'm asking you to please continue to invest in the Bright Beginnings program
con fondos para que a través de esta iniciativa se siga apoyando y construyendo líderes
with funds in order to be able to develop and edify leaders
para todos los niños de la edad temprana y las familias del condado de Monterrey.
for all the early childhood, as well as the families of Monterey.
Agradezco su atención y de antemano doy las gracias por su apoyo al grupo de las mamás de Salinas
I
Abogan
thank you beforehand, and I give you thanks for supporting the Mamás de Salinas program,
y por su liderazgo y su apoyo, como siempre, hacia los niños de nuestro condado de Monterrey.
as well as your leadership and support for all the children throughout Monterey County.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alma, for your comments as well. I see Maria still has her hand up, but I think it's a legacy hand. There we go. Okay. We'll come back to the board for any comments. I'm looking for hands raised, and I see Supervisor Askew has her hand up.
Thank you. Pleased to represent our board on the Children's Council, and I appreciate the work that's done, discussions that are had, and the networking that occurs in support of making sure our systems are all working together to best support our children and families. I did have a question on the slides. The children in foster care in Monterey County, it shows rates of entry per 1,000 children. Do we have a number of current children who are in foster care or under in Monterey County? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, the number has been declining. We have less than 300 children in
Less
foster
than
care.
300. Okay. Thank you, Laurie. Which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of children to be under our responsibility. And then I just also wanted to call out, and I know we get a lot of information provided, but the student homelessness rates, it's been a steady number, but it's a large number. And when you think about 9,492 students who don't have secure or stable housing in our community, and the ramifications of what that means for those children, for their classmates, for their teachers, for their parents, for their ability to not be to grow in a safe, healthy way. I had to call attention to that figure because it's staggering and it's shocking, and it's traumatic for all of us. It causes for communities to really struggle. So I think we do need to be really aware of some of these data points, and that's one that I tell people that, and they don't believe me at first, but then we talk about it. So just want to say a big thank you to also the Bright Beginnings, the work that's being done. I know it kind of sounds like this tagline, but behind the scenes, there's so much work being done. There are policies that are being changed in small ways and in large ways. And the big thing that just strikes me about Bright Beginnings, the Children's Council, is that over the past 2 years, children and families have had dramatic and significant needs, but they don't have anyone who has the power to stand up and be their voice in spaces and in times where a lot of other folks are going to financially benefit from making their voice the loudest in the room. And so the way in which you have empowered parents to find their voice and to be present in conversations so that their needs are heard and their children's needs are heard and their needs are prioritized and the things that are going to make their life better are prioritized. I think that it's so easy for so many of us, if you're not in the weeds with a baby at home and a toddler at your foot and a kid who's trying to do distance learning without being able to turn the computer on, and you're exhausted. So without having someone who can be there as the advocate and the voice, there's so much power and so much meaning in that. So I just want to say thank you and the larger Bright Beginnings and Children's Council team for being the voices of so many in our community who don't otherwise have voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Supervisor Askew. That was really well said, well put. I'm seeing Supervisor Lopez's hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just
Supervisor
want to thank everyone who came today to help make this presentation. We know that the story here is not one of a single agency or council, but one of collaboration. And I think that especially during the pandemic, a lot of those tools were really forged and we haven't let them go. As a community, we continue to use them. And one of the strongest is the advocacy piece that's been created. And so I want to take a moment to say a few words in Spanish. A las mamás de Salinas abogan, gracias por sus esfuerzos. Sabemos que no es fácil tratar de poner nuevos formas de abogar por su comunidad adelante, pero ustedes lo hicieron en uno de los tiempos más difíciles para nuestro condado, para nuestra comunidad, para nuestro estado y el mundo. Gracias por sus esfuerzos y por todo lo que hacen por sus hijos, porque esos esfuerzos también hacen nuevas oportunidades para los niños de la comunidad y les agradecemos por su trabajo y por sus esfuerzos. Gracias. So I just thank the moms for stepping forward at a very difficult time for our community and stepping up to play a role that's difficult, especially in a time of crisis, but doing so not just creating a better future for their own children, but for the children throughout our community that will benefit from their efforts. And so I'm just thankful for all the approaches. And I know that behind the scenes, as Supervisor Askew said, a lot of new efforts are being worked on, created, and making sure that the glue that keeps everybody together is stronger than ever. And so appreciate everybody's efforts, especially in tracking the data, so that at the end of the day, we can point to those successes and realities in a way that long-term folks can understand through those numbers that make sense. And so thank you for the presentation. I appreciate the work.
Thank you, Supervisor Lopez. Supervisor Alejo.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what Supervisor Lopez just said. Yo nomás también quiero agradecer y expresar mi respeto y agradecimiento a las mamás que hablaron hoy. Sabemos que en estas juntas muchas veces fallan los voces o no se incluyen los voces de muchas de nuestras familias. So, agradezco bastante hacer y abogar para nuestras familias, nuestros jóvenes en estos asuntos comunitarios, familiares y educativos. I just want to express all to these amazing moms that we're participating in today's meeting. We know that it's very few times that we get the participation of these amazing moms who are not only involved in their homes and in their schools, but now to also be a voice for thousands of other parents who cannot participate in these meetings. So it's out of respect to them that I wanted to also add on some few words along with what Supervisor Lopez just said. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Alejo. Supervisor Phillips?
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues if I knew what they said, but now we really do appreciate the work that you're doing. Me especially, because I have two of my kids are teachers, and so they really see it. And Todd Keating is sent back to our chief probation officer, and then I, from the perspective of Rancho Cielo, the kids we see that we're trying to turn around sure didn't have the opportunities and the advantages that you're bringing them. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Phillips. And I just share my admiration. I think the Children's Council is one of the best collaborations that we have, and the programs that have come from Children's Council, like Bright Beginnings, really are amazing. And not dissimilar to Supervisor Askew, when I tell people in the community, people that I just am chatting with, that there are nearly 10,000 kids who are homeless, according to McKinney-Vento in our county, they're shocked. A county our size with the unbelievable wealth and riches that we have, to have 10,000 children living in what's counted as homelessness is just absolutely untenable. It's unthinkable. I did want to call out one additional thing when we were thinking about your comment that only 26% of children 0 to 5 or 0 to 4 rather have access to affordable and excellent childcare. I want to mention that there is a citizen initiative that is coming up to support childcare, and that is going to be on the November ballot, if I'm not mistaken. And it's to care for Monterey County kids. And it's been something that I've looked into a little bit, and I'm totally supportive of it. And just hope that people keep in mind that with the passage of something like this, we could provide the thing that children need the most to thrive. And that's to be in affordable healthcare, and it allows the families to move forward as well. So thank you again for your comments. It's a wonderful presentation, and I know a lot of work went into it. So thank you all so very much for doing this today. And with that, we will accept the, the presentation and close this item and move on to item 21. which is to conduct a public hearing to consider amending figures 5 and 6D of the Del Monte Forest Land Use Plan to change the land use designation on a 0.497 acre parcel from open space to medium density residential. And I expect that we're going to have a fine presentation on this from Craig Spencer. And I believe that that is Phil Angelo. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Craig Spencer with Housing and Community Development, and here with me is Phil Angelo, also with Housing and Community Development. Phil will be providing you with a presentation today. Phil, go ahead.
Good afternoon, members of the board and the public. I won't, I guess, restate my name, but I will be presenting staff's report on Stewart and Rodriguez, PLN 200314. The project is located at 4209 Sunrise Road, Pebble Beach in the Del Monte Forest Land Use Plan in the coastal zone. And it has a land use designation of open space forest and a zoning of resource conservation with a design control overlay. The proposed project is to amend that land use designation to medium density residential and the zoning to medium density residential with a density of 4 units an acre and a design control overlay. The project was previously heard at the Del Monte Forest Land Use Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission, both of which recommended approval. The property had been developed with a single family home and guest house around 1949. In 1969, it received its first zoning classification, which was R1, that allowed single family homes. In 1984 and 1988, respectively, the Del Monte Forest Land Use Plan and Coastal Implementation Plan that includes the zoning ordinance were adopted. And that's what changed the land use to open space forest and the zoning to resource conservation, which doesn't allow for single family homes or residential uses. And therefore it would be a legal non-conforming use. In 2019, the property was cited for converting a portion of the garage to living space and expanding their guest house without permits. As no further expansion of that non-conforming residential use would be allowable with its current zoning, processing this land use change and zoning change would be prerequisites for the owner to seek retroactive approval of the work in the garage and the guest house. The alternative would be to restore the property to its former condition. So in 2020, the property owner applied to amend the land use plan designation and zoning. In reviewing the history and characteristics of the site, staff could not identify why the open space forest and resource conservation zoning were applied to the property and believe that they were done so inappropriately. A potential reason is that the original preparers of that plan and that zoning map drew the boundaries around the subdivision, which ended here and did not include the property. So if they didn't go out and do a site-specific investigation or research, they wouldn't have known that it was already developed with the residential use. And so the purpose of the resource conservation zone is to provide a district to protect, preserve, and enhance the sensitive resources of Monterey County, including plant and wildlife habitats and public view sheds. Monterey pine does exist on the property and in adjacent rights-of-way. So this is the property boundary, and then there are some adjacent rights-of-way here, and the forest is shown in purple. However, impact to forest and biological resources from this land use change and zoning change would be less than significant as the property has already been heavily disturbed by residential development. Any future development would be subject to the land use plan policies protecting sensitive habitats and forest resources. The project would be exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guidelines section 15265. This exemption applies to government actions taken to by a local agency for the adoption of a local coastal program, including amendments like land use plan amendments and zoning changes. Therefore, the staff recommends that the Board of Supervisors adopt a resolution that would find that the project is statutorily exempt from CEQA, find that the proposed amendment is to be carried out in conformance with the Coastal Act, adopting the local coastal program amendment to change the land use designation from open space to, or I'm sorry, yes, open space forest to medium density residential. Adopt an ordinance to change the zoning from the resource conservation with a design control overlay to medium density residential with that density and design control overlay, and then direct staff to submit that local coastal program amendment and zoning ordinance amendment to the California Coastal Commission for certification. And that concludes staff's presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Let me see if there are any questions from or comments from any of my colleagues. And I see no hands raised. Okay. Is there any member of the public that wishes to comment on this item? And let's see if we have anyone on Zoom. It does not appear to be anyone ready to comment on this. So I just want to thank you very much for bringing this forward. Things that looks like the action is a little bit overdue, but I understand the owners had to have been pretty frustrated back in 2008 when they were first informed of the need for the land use change. At any rate, I'm recognizing the unanimous recognition and recommendation for approval from the LUAC, the Planning Commission, and your staff report, and the initial concurrence of the Planning Commission, the Coastal Commission staff. I'm supportive of the land use plan, and I'd like to make a motion to move approval to adopt the resolution and the ordinance as presented in the staff report, and direct staff to submit the LCP and zoning amendments to the Coastal Commission.
Second.
Thank you very much. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Supervisor Alejo,
Aye.
Supervisor Phillips,
Aye.
Supervisor Lopez, Supervisor Lopez,
Great. Supervisor Lopez? Was that an aye?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Great.
Yeah, sorry. I'll jump the gun there.
Chair Supervisor Adams.
Aye. Thank you very much. And with that, we will close that item and move forward with item 22, which is to adopt a resolution approving the 2021 Emergency Operations Plan, the Annex Evacuation and Transportation Plan in accordance with Chapter 2.68.080 and 2.68040 of the County Code. And I see we have our able staff here to give our presentation. And we have Gary Millay, the Emergency Services Manager, and Kelsey Scanlon.
The presentation. Okay, I can log in real quick. No.
Sorry for the delay.
Quite all right.
Oh no. Sorry. It's loading.
You of all people.
Thank you. Oh no, I should have brought my laptop.
So Semi does have it.
Oh, great.
Do you want our thumb drive? Do you want our thumb drive?
Yes, she's rocking it today. There we go.
Here's you, Kelsey, it's on.
Thank you, Semi.
Sorry. I'll log in on our way out or log off on our way out.
And so now we are doing item number 22.
Okay, you'll have to remember which slides of you are then.
Yeah, we're going to wing it. It's going to be great.
Are we all ready to go?
We're ready to go.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Chair and Board. We really appreciate the opportunity to come before you today to present this plan and hopefully get your approval. I would like to start by saying that this evacuation and transportation plan is the culmination, COVID delayed, of about 3 years worth of work between the Office of Emergency Services, numerous county departments, all of our responder agencies in the operational area, and public review. So next slide, please. This plan is an annex to our emergency operations plan. It was approved by the Disaster Council at the last meeting in October, and it is was written last year, but now that it's 22 will be approved and will be reviewed every 5 years. Next slide, please.
All right, so in general, the operational area has some standing priorities, and you'll see these consistently throughout all of our plans. And ultimately, we aim to protect life, protect property, reduce suffering, generally protect the environment, and restore basic services to help facilitate the community returning back to its day-to-day lifestyle with as minimal impact as possible.
Next slide.
So the purpose of the plan really takes the overall concept of evacuation and transportation and gives you an outline of what types of operations should be conducted to do so effectively. It includes secondary and tertiary responses such as emergency messaging and public alerts. It looks at how we've organized the evacuation zones, how to actually move large quantities of people from one area to another, how to provide accommodations for people with access and functional needs, and to determine how best to shelter animals as well as humans. And then ultimately, once you've taken somebody from their home, how can you return them as quickly as possible, as safely as possible? And throughout the plan, you'll notice that there's a variety of objectives that we actively try to meet, but ultimately we're looking to provide government services for evacuation and transportation in safe and effective manners that also are don't consume more resources than the response requires, and to do so in a collaborative effort that meets both the first responder needs to do so effectively, but as well as the community needs.
Next slide, please. So the goal of an evacuation seems very simple to understand. We're trying to move as many people from an area that is deemed unsafe to an area that is safe in the shortest period of time with the least amount of effort. Next slide, please. We have 5 phases to our evacuation: mobilization, evacuation and shelter in place, impact of hazard, displacement, mass care, and then a re-entry.
I'd also like to add for this, this seems pretty intuitive, but I'll just say it out loud. For some incidents, it's really no notice, or that's what we call it, no notice, meaning it occurs and then the response has to immediately follow the initial impact. So an example would be an earthquake. There's really only 60 seconds that we get to respond. Or a wildfire where you have maybe a couple of hours, whereas with COVID, we had a very protracted response. Obviously, there weren't any evacuations that were taking place, but it was over a longer period of time, which we had to actually implement any type of response strategy. So when we talk about evacuation and transportation, the sooner we know that an incident might impact a certain area, we try to mobilize resources as quick as possible. Sometimes there's not enough time to utilize all the resources that might be available in the area or outside of the area. So if you're requesting mutual aid from outside of the county, it could be anywhere from 5 hours to 12 hours.
So the basic way that, in general terms, that this happens is, as you all know, the EOC and the Office of Emergency Services are there to support an incident command. So an incident happens, responders respond to the incident, they form an incident command, and then they determine that certain areas are unsafe to be occupied at that point. They contact us for assistance, and between the incident commander, which is typically a fire official, and a law enforcement official, they form a unified command. They make the decision that an area is unsafe, and then they determine the parameters of which people need to leave that area. And so that's the purpose of this plan, is to assist them to make those decisions rapidly and consistently, so that the public has an idea ahead of time when the public notice goes out that they are being impacted by the emergency. So once we send the messaging to get people out of a certain area, then we're also responsible for assisting them in that process. Now, we know that, as you'll see in subsequent slides, about 80% of the people historically leave on their own with their own vehicles. And so that leaves 20% of the people that may need to be assisted to leaving the area. They either don't have transportation, they have access and functional needs that they need assistance. And it's up to responders and the Emergency Operations Center to facilitate that, working with our community partners to then let them know where they should go, to what evacuation point, what route to take, and what support they're going to get when they get there. Next slide, please. So there's some standard terminology that is developed by the state that is used by all responders. And some of these will be very familiar to you because we've had evacuations, unfortunately, in the county. An evacuation warning is the first warning that you'll get from your Emergency Operations Center based on a potential threat or a threat that is not considered life-threatening at the moment to a specific area. However, the people that need extra time, people with animals, people with access and functional needs, that is the time for them to leave the area. That is not the time for them to say, well, it's just a warning, I'll wait until I get ordered to leave, because it takes additional time. An evacuation order, which is the next type of terminology, could come relatively soon after a warning, depending upon the incident and the severity of whatever's causing that area to be evacuated. An evacuation order is a lawful order by law enforcement for people to actually leave the area. It is, you're restricting somebody's First Amendment rights, and that's why it has to be issued by a law enforcement agency. Shelter in place, as a lot of people in Salinas have recently experienced, is an order to stay indoors. We ask people to shut their doors and windows. Depending on the threat, they may have to, put towels underneath their cracks of their doors, et cetera, if the area is very smoky. But it's not safe for them to move about freely. So in some cases, leaving their home and traveling through an area is more dangerous than staying at home. So that's why we issue a shelter in place. When an evacuation order is lifted, that's the formal announcement that the evacuation has ended and people can return. A hard closure means that nobody can go into an area except first responders. Soft closure, obviously first responders can go into that area, but also ancillary responders such as Public Works, Caltrans, et cetera, if they need to assist us with road closure notices. And then resident-only closures, everybody stays out except limited residents can go into an area as well as the responders above. Next slide, please.
So ultimately, the only type of agency that has the authority to issue an evacuation order is a law enforcement agency in the unincorporated area. It's the Monterey County Sheriff's Office. But ultimately, the recommendation to evacuate is given by the incident commander to the law enforcement agency. Rarely you will ever see an evacuation order issued without collaboration between fire and law. And of course, as Gary has mentioned, our office is here to support them in those endeavors. Next slide. So this is generally how the process works. Gary's already covered this a bit, but there's the identification of the threat, the initial notification to response personnel, and the establishment of incident command, identification of the population that's been threatened, recommendation from the incident commander to law enforcement about how to move forward, and then law enforcement requests notification to the public by Office of Emergency Services, at which point they mobilize resources to enforce what we call door-to-doors or knock and talks, depending on the level of evacuation. They also go through a very active process of tagging structures and roads that have been evacuated and having that cataloged with dispatch and establishing those road closures. They're ultimately responsible for everything that's within the evacuation area once people leave, including, preventing looters from going in the area, anybody with nefarious intent, and maintaining a safe area for first responders. And at which point the Office of Emergency Services and the Emergency Operations Center is here to facilitate any secondary or tertiary services such as transportation or evacuation collection points. Next slide, please.
Go ahead.
So there's a variety of assumptions and challenges, some of which are fairly intuitive. But as we've already said, some hazards will have some warning time, we'll have some lead time to mobilize resources. Others, there will be no warning whatsoever. The decision about whether to evacuate or shelter in place is really situation specific. And there's a lot of different components that go into that ultimate decision. So you may find an area that isn't immediately impacted, but there's only one egress, so they have to be evacuated ahead of time. So generally, we look at duration, roadway conditions, health and safety issues, and all of that is taken into account when law and fire make that decision. It can be confusing for some people, especially when you don't have infrastructure set up in advance. So explaining an area can be quite complex, especially if it's verbal and there's no visual component to assist in understanding what's being communicated with you. And ultimately, the second we ask people to leave their homes, we are constantly evaluating how fast can we get them back into their homes. It's not something that we think about, like a week later. It's always at the forefront of our mind, how fast can we get people back to their homes? Ultimately, we see with mass evacuations that alert and warning systems rarely, if ever, reach every evacuee for a variety of reasons, whether it be technological or man-made error or failure. And 911 call centers will always be overwhelmed with mass evacuations, which is why we have secondary and tertiary public information resources. As Gary has also mentioned, a lot of people will self-evacuate in their own vehicles, especially in more rural areas. They have the resources to do so. And very few people actually seek emergency sheltering. So across the nation, you could anticipate somewhere from 5 to 10% of the evacuated population seeking care and shelter resources. Here, it's a bit lower. It's closer to like 2%, maybe even less than that. And then ultimately, you're always going to find a couple of people here and there who just refuse to evacuate. And people with access and functional needs do not have the luxury of evacuating quickly. Therefore, they should do so as early as possible. Next slide, please.
And so to Kelsey's point, you'll see in the plan that a lot of different resources. We use the words alert and warning, and that is specific to the tools that we have to alert the public. But as we all know, that's always an issue that a lot of people don't get the message because they either haven't registered, they don't have a cell phone, there's no cell phone coverage in that area, reverse 911 doesn't get to them. So we utilize all of the mechanisms we have, including traditional media. The most recent evacuations that we had, other than the Salinas fire, which was really in an urban area, was the Palo Colorado fire. And as you'll remember, the traditional media was extremely helpful immediately by posting our evacuations on the air so that people got that information also. We're trying to use every resource that we have available to get every opportunity for people to leave, including, as was mentioned earlier, the sheriff does door-to-door. They drive up the street with their loudspeaker and instructing people to leave the area. So it doesn't seem like a very competent system when you think that, you know, possibly 20 or 30% of the people aren't even notified. But I think in reality, it's much, much less than that. We also utilize our community engagement where we, in areas that do have communication problems, we connect with community leaders and we develop ahead of time really community phone trees so that we only really have to notify that one community leader, and then it's on him to or her to notify really large groups of people in their community. And that's quite really effective, even though it's really old school. But we try to utilize all of those measures that we can. The basic plan is broken into 7 regions. As you'll see here, Peninsula, North County, Salinas, Carmel Valley, Salinas Valley, Big Sur, and South County regions. Next slide, please. And those regions are then further broken down into zones. And that evacuation zone is a key component of this plan. They're numbered, as you can see. Each region has a different alphabetic letter, and then the zones that follow it range from 32 zones in Big Sur all the way up to 127 zones in the Salinas region. But the key to this is that those zones were created in strict collaboration with the people that are actually implementing this plan, the responders. Hours and hours of meetings and analyzation of their specific areas, taking into consideration topography, access points, population. All of that went into play into developing that specific zone. And as you can see, they're geographically quite different from each other. And that's really the reason. Some larger zones are in much more rural areas with less population, whereas one of the reasons that the Salinas region has so many is because it's so urbanized. The zones have to be much smaller because you really are trying to only evacuate as few people as necessary when you order that evacuation. Next slide, please.
There's a variety of reasons for why we do this. Ultimately, it helps people gain situational awareness about where they are before the disaster, what threats or hazards might be near them or their home or their school. It helps us in identifying areas most at risk. It also helps cut down some of the amount of time it takes when we issue evacuation orders and send out that initial notification. But really it reduces resource burdens and it facilitates reentry and repopulation and accelerates the transition to recovery. It helps us with lettering and numbering schemes. So I'm not sure if you remember during the Carmel and River fire, the Carmel fire started and it was a numbering system, like 1 through what have you. And then the River fire started. And then the Carmel fire started and we had to number those 2. And as the fires merged into 1, we had 2 zone 6s, 2 zone 7s, and it became quite chaotic numbering this or renumbering the zones. So we added a letter to each of the zones and it became more chaos. But what we did find during those incidents was that people really affiliated with their zone number. I could go into the Carmel Valley and ask any of the residents and they'd tell you exactly which zone that they were in and when their zone was evacuated and when they got to go home and the status of their zone and the status of their neighbor's zone or their mother's zone. And people really affiliated with these, and it helped them mentally recover faster because there was something to categorize and there was something to hold on to. And it also gave them a sense of unity. So who's in my zone? Who do I contact to go back with? Are they going back before me? Can they check on my home? So it also fostered that community concept that's really necessary for mental, physical, financial recovery from these types of disasters. We've seen time and time again that with large incidents, specifically the 2017 fires, the 2018 Camp Fire, I think the fires in El Dorado, last summer, they had pre-made evacuation zones, and it assisted them in being more effective in evacuating mass populations of people in a timely fashion. And so their communities have really taken to it. I know that we've seen about 50-50 response from people. They either love it or hate it. And there's pros and cons to both. We've done evacuations or evacuations without zones. And, there's things that we can always do better. There's things that went really well. And we've started analyzing how those events would have gone had we had these pre-made evacuation zones. And there's a lot of things that could have gone a lot better with this type of pre-planning done in advance. And so ultimately, we're hoping that this will be successful. Obviously, we're constantly evaluating our efficacy and our policies and procedures, but by no means are we just completely done with this. Next slide. So ultimately, when we move people, we look at a couple of things. So once we've asked a group of people to leave, how do they get to their next point? Where are they going? Once we've made that decision, we're not washing our hands of it. We have to, provide additional support. So people can either go from their residence that they're evacuated from to an evacuation center or a temporary evacuation point or a collection point, and then go to a shelter or a friend's house, or a hotel, where have you, or they can go straight from their home to a shelter on their own. It really depends on the type of population. So in more urban settings, you'd probably see more of the hub and spoke model, whereas with more rural areas, you'll see people self-transport from their home directly to a shelter or a friend's place. Next slide, please.
Go ahead. You can.
Okay. And we talked about this a little bit more, and this is actually outlined in a separate plan called the Care and Shelter Plan, which you all approved, I believe, in 2018, way back in the day, feels like a lifetime ago. But there's a variety of different services that are provided, but ultimately the county has the ability to either establish an evacuation assembly point, which is basically like go to this corner and get picked up. There's no services there other than eventually somebody is going to come get you. You see this in really dire situations. Other times we'll implement temporary evacuation points. So maybe we'll just open a gymnasium. The only service there is a roof over your head and lights on and maybe a bathroom. But ultimately someone's coming to get you, whether it's a family or friend or a bus to transport you to a shelter. There's an evacuation center. So a population of people that don't necessarily need sheltering, they have the capability to shelter on their own. So it's for a limited duration of time. They have a place where they can go get food, water, charge their phone. There are social services there or American Red Cross to provide snacks, what have you, childcare. And then you see shelter. So this is for longer duration incidents where people are displaced from their homes for more than 48 hours, essentially, and they don't have the resources available. Say there's no hotels, or the hotels are occupied by the mass quantities of people or responders coming into the area. These are run by either American Red Cross or the Department of Social Services or state or FEMA. Or people can go to their friends and family. And you'll see this most commonly in Monterey County. If you ever are asked by a community member, what about temporary refuge areas, like an open field? This is not recommended and not an acceptable option unless you are a trained professional. Next slide, please.
Yeah, and just a point on that term temporary refuge area was invented in the fire service for firefighters, wildland firefighters, to if they're in a remote area, to have that identified as a safe zone for them in case they got overrun. So, and by no means is it meant as a term for the public.
So for reentry and repopulation, ultimately, as I had said, we're constantly reevaluating when can people go home? How can we get them home as fast as possible? And there are a variety of things that need to happen before that actually occurs. And I think this is where the public gets most frustrated. They don't understand. They see that the threat has already passed, but they can't go home immediately. And ultimately, it's our job as public safety officials to ensure that the area is at a minimum safe for people to access. So assessing roads, bridges, making sure that the infrastructure is safe for people to utilize, removing any electrical wires that might be still live or downed, any hazardous trees, especially after a wildfire that may have been burnt out that need to be felled. There's so many different critical infrastructure components that we look at to make sure that they're safe before people are allowed back into the area. There's also never a unanimous decision there's never a decision made in a silo to allow people to go back into the area. It's made collectively by fire, law, American Red Cross, SPCA, our office, Verizon, AT&T, Public Works, literally anybody who has a vested interest in the assets and critical infrastructure in the area. We also do damage assessments of residential structures, water systems during this time. And we meet every day to look at which zones do we want to release the next day or later that day, who needs to sign off on each of these zones before we can release it back to the public, what additional services need to be provided, is it feasible for the Palo Colorado fire. There were access issues, right? So there were apparatus still actively on the roadway. There was debris falling from the mountain onto Highway 1. There were poles being felled and replaced by PG&E with helicopters. The topography of the roadway was such that if you lifted the road closure and moved it up the road, there might be an increase in traffic accidents due to visibility and the speed of the road. There's just so many things that go into that decision to allow people back to their homes. And it's, I think, one of our biggest struggles with education. At that point, people just want to go home. Now is not the time to educate why it takes so long. And so that's all really outlined in this plan. But ultimately, there's 3 different phases. Obviously, the area is closed. There's limited access. So I've seen limited access for residents in Paradise during the campfires, the North Bay fires, especially when there's a longer period of time for recovery, especially with residential areas. And then, of course, open, meaning everyone is allowed to access the area. Next slide, please.
Next slide. But just for the public, just to make sure they understand, because it can be quite frustrating when, by all intents and purposes, it looks as though a fire is not even near an area and you're still being held out. We, as the Emergency Operations Center, ask a lot of questions of the incident commander, the unified command, to make sure that they take into consideration all of those aspects. Ultimately, it's if they say it's unsafe, it's going to be deemed unsafe, and that's the end decision. So, but just in closing, I want to let you know what our vision is for how this plan is going to work. We've gotten total buy-in from the responders on all of our zones. They were critical in helping us to create them. And so our commitment to them is we are going to make what we call an evacuation football for every command vehicle for both fire and law in the county, in the whole entire operational area. That football is probably familiar, thinking of the president's football for nuclear codes, although this is not quite that critical. It's going to be just a little briefcase that has plasticized maps with all of these different zones for the entire county in it, so that a command officer can go to any area of the county and be qualified to be the evacuation chief that is running that evacuation. The incident happens, unified command gets formed, OES gets notified, we activate the Emergency Operations Center. The Emergency Operations Center manager dispatches a incident liaison to the command post, and then the command post then assigns a law enforcement chief, usually a lieutenant or above, and a fire command officer to team together as the evacuation division. That evacuation division then embraces the EOC liaison, so that the three entities that are responsible for determining the evacuation areas, issuing the evacuation orders, and issuing the alert and warning are together at the scene of an incident. They pull out their football, put their maps on the table of their unified command post, and then they look at real-time pictures of what the incident is doing and what zones need to be evacuated. Once that decision is made, the incident liaison communicates that back to the EOC, and alert and warning takes place to the best of our ability. On the community end, we are going to institute a campaign called Know Your Zone. That is one of the critical components. As Kelsey kind of mentioned, it was very much embraced in the Carmel Valley area, and we feel from experience in other areas that have had significant evacuation issues, people want to know their zone, and it's up to us to educate them. So we're going to do that with a public campaign. And so hopefully this time next year, everybody will be trained, both the responders and the public. And this plan will not just be a plan that sits on the shelf. It will be an interactive plan that the public not only understands and acts upon when requested, but the responders take to heart and utilize as a tool to help them quickly mobilize people to save lives and property. And that is it. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. That was very informative. And I will check first with my colleagues up in person. Do you have questions, Supervisor Phillips?
Yeah, you never think about these things until you need them. I've seen it in action, not as much as you have in your district, but out there when we had power out for almost a week in North County. I remember after the 95 earthquake, we were figuring out how do I do my arraignments. We had to do them out in the lawn so we could handle the in custodies, but appreciate it. I mean, this type of forethought is what we really needed. And you never focus on this until you're there, so thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Askew?
Thank you as well. I was just, excited that somehow I got lucky as, a 001. So someone was looking at a map when they created the charts. No, really though, I do, this is really helpful. And I think it's, like you said, people are not paying attention to this when they're in that moment of crisis or worried about your parent or your loved one or your sister. So being able to have this communicated and have that emergency plan and that thinking about it. The questions that I did have is, most of the descriptions of the crisis, the emergencies that were being just described, and the sort of the focus on law enforcement and fire. And as I think about, the reality that COVID sort of threw us a curveball of sorts. And while we didn't have mass evacuations, we did have evacuations, and we had care and shelter plans for those who needed to be isolated. In what role does public health or environmental health fit into sort of the chain of command and the decision-making? And how do we envision these evacuation plans and the different monitoring areas in a crisis that isn't sort of a site-specific crisis?
So I'll let Kelsey chime in a second, but all of our plans are whole community plans that they are taking into consideration the entire operational area, and they're all hazard plans. So as we've seen in COVID, a health emergency is just a different type of hazard. It could be, we could list the 13 different FEMA hazards that our county is susceptible to, all the way from wildfire to tsunami to, hurricanes. That's one, we're not actually one that we are. We escaped that one, but
Avalanche.
Yeah. So this type of plan is viable for any of those emergencies. In any type of emergency, you're going to have an incident commander. That's the nature of emergency response. That is what the federal government requires through NIMS. That is what the state requires through SEMS. And that is what the responders use as ICS. Somebody is going to be in charge of that response. And that person or group of people is called the incident command. It does not have to be a fire official, and it does not have to be a law enforcement official. Whatever the hazard is or the threat, that key person will be the one that is in charge. It could be a public works official, it could be a health official, or a combination of all of those in a unified command setting. So this plan will be just as appropriate for any evacuation, regardless of the impetus of it, whether it's a health emergency, a fire emergency, or a general public emergency such as an earthquake.
To Gary's point as well, the health department, which includes EMS, hospitals, environmental health, they all have seats within the Emergency Operations Center under the operations section, medical health branch. And ultimately, they have a variety of responsibilities that they employ depending on the type of hazard. So for the Taylor Farms incident, environmental health was out there doing air monitoring, providing recommendations on how best to contain the ammonia. I believe EMS was there providing support if there was a need for mass evacuations. They were also liaising between the hospitals and the IC about whether or not to shelter in place and evacuate. So they do have a very active role, not just on scene at the incident command post, but at the Emergency Operations Center, which they have designated seats to fill.
Great, thank you. And just the other comment, and I know this report isn't about sort of communications on a broader scale, but I think I want to just recognize sort of that informal network of communication that happens. And I think you're right that people do look for structure and that someone's in charge and that there's a system that makes sense. And that gives comfort that even if all it is that I know is that my zone has a name to it, that someone is thinking about things in a way that is logical and that I can trust the system is working. So there is significant value to that. The community phone tree system, I think, is one that's really important. And I know that and we can talk about this another time when we talk about communications, but the reliance on the phone trees, reliance on the public media to get our messages out, super critical. People are paying attention. But the one thing I've always looked back to is if there could be a single point of communication, because sometimes I'm hesitant just to forward something that the media is saying unless I've been able to verify it myself. And so getting really clear about who is that point person, that communications point, whether it's, always going to be OES once an incident is called, or whether it's, one of the different jurisdictions, but finding the right way so that people know who is the single point that I can look to for trusted, verified information that's not gone through sort of the game of telephone, because we all know that sometimes information can get skewed or be less correctly communicated when it's not coming directly from the source. So I think there is also a desire for who is that voice and where can I always find that singular place of accurate information. So thank you very much for this work and the plan and just bringing us up to speed as a county so that we're prepared for whatever comes next.
Thank you, Supervisor Rudescu. And now I'll go to Supervisor Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the work. I really appreciate this. I know, having been through so many of these different incidences and needing to be able to show the community where they are and what their zone is has been something I've been asking for. So I greatly appreciate these predetermined zones. I think a couple different asks that I have. One would be to work with IT to create an interactive map, the standalone, where folks can plug in their address and have their zone pop up and say, this is your zone number. And secondly, there is a site already that is Find Your Supervisor on the county page. And when you put in your address, the same thing happens. It tells you who your supervisor is. But under that, there's some other facts. It'd be nice if zone was one of those facts that came up on that sheet. Just one more way to make sure that folks are getting access to this information repeatedly, because we know that's what it takes in order to make sure that information becomes part of somebody's day-to-day understanding. The other critical piece here that I haven't heard mentioned is how what languages and how we communicate this information out to the community with. And I think that it's critical that we keep in mind that even during the last incident, some of the translation wasn't quite on point, making sure that we are identifying people within the county who can make sure that the translation is regionally, culturally, and linguistically appropriate, so that we're reaching people in the right way, so that they're getting the accurate information, and not just in an incident, but even with this effort of Know Your Zone, we have to make sure that this information gets out there in those languages and ways that the community can absorb those and become familiar with them. And when an emergency does happen, that we're putting out information in all those appropriate languages, regardless of where the incident is, because things do, as we heard, get lost in translation. And so making sure that the info is correct as possible from the beginning, I think is something that I want to make sure gets included here early on, so that there's a clear understanding of the need throughout Monterey County for those appropriate approaches. And then lastly, I know, in terms of the communication piece, something else that didn't happen as quickly just in the recent incident was just social media, and pushing out through that channel as the trusted messenger that is OES. I know we always have the on-call officer, and Gary, you and I were working well through this particular event, but I know there was just a lack of communication on that. And so if we could formalize that in some way and include it in the plan, in terms of the process, to make sure that somebody's always thinking about informing the community that way, I think it would be greatly appreciated. But overall, I really think that we've made huge strides through this planning, and I am appreciative of the efforts put forward in order to make sure that folks are aware ahead of time, because that, in my opinion, is half the battle. My last point is the question about those final sites of refuge that we talked about, like open fields. I personally would like to see some of those included, given the fact that we talked about some of these incidences might happen in a way that it is last and final, right? Warning, your initial warning is your last warning. This thing's coming. I know I've been able to spend a lot of time with the supervisor from Butte County recently, and he and his family had to pull out into an open field and have the fire burn over them during the campfire. And I've heard him tell his story in different venues as we advocate for resiliency for California. And I know that if that site had been pre-identified, it could have been a lot easier for his community. It will never be somebody's first, hope. But given the harrowing stories that I've heard from his community, I do think having some of those sites identified, if that is somebody's last opportunity, given circumstances, it could be of help. But that's just my opinion. And thank you all again.
Thank you for your comments, Supervisor Lopez. I appreciate that. And I'm going to go now to Supervisor Alejo.
Yeah, I want to just make similar comments. I appreciate the plan, appreciate the work. And I think every major emergency that we've had, we try to improve and perfect our system. But I think I also raised concerns last week, in fact, on what happened at Taylor Farms, because we did get concerns from community leaders. And it seems that when we set up an alert system, there should be a late night alert, especially when there is the shelter in place or potential evacuations. We should have an email chain with all the superintendents in the county, with the school districts, certainly with the employers. These are some systems that would really go a long way to get the word out when decisions are being made. For example, shutting the schools down the next day during that Taylor Farms fire, and recognizing that a message from OES that's unified that schools could send out would help us all stay on the same page and getting the exact same message out to families. I think we really avoided a major disaster there, because when you look up, if you just Google, exposure to high concentrations of ammonia, which really was a big risk, there really should have been a pre-evacuation warning in case there was a fire and explosion of 35,000 pounds of ammonia going into the air and creating a toxic plume. And knowing that there were still a lot of workers out in that path, we could have had an incident where hundreds, if not thousands of workers would have been exposed, and they would have had the symptoms would have been burning of the eyes, their nose, their throat, respiratory tract. But it's also known to cause blindness, lung damage, or even death. So that would have been a really horrible incident, and people would have been asking us, why didn't we do more to evacuate those workers, and knowing that there was a risk of an explosion. So we averted it, but let's learn from it to have a better system with employers, especially when there is a risk of an explosion, making sure that workers are evacuated. And because I drove down that 101 and did see many crews still out in that pathway of a potential toxic plume. And the other part was also when our Nixle tech system, that we do those audio recordings, that gives links to people to be able to hear the message in multiple languages. The one that did come into my home was in English, and immediately after there was the electronic Spanish translation, and you can understand half of it. So we know that system, that translation system, is not good enough, and we need to find a better way to do that translation, because that electronic reading is just incomprehensible. So those are just suggestions. I'm thinking about doing a referral on it, but if OES could say we're going to work on those things, then avoid me having to do that. But we need to perfect some of these areas of communication with community partners and in addressing multiple languages as well. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and make a couple of comments and questions on my own quickly. I know we've got a number of things still yet to cover today. I see that the plan takes a regional approach, and I'm really pleased about that. I understand the needed work, but I've also heard a lot of concerns about evacuations at the neighborhood scale. And one of the things that I was wondering about is what recommendations do you have for people who are concerned about evacuations in existing areas that just have one road in? As you well know, both the Colorado fire, out in the Cachao area when we had the Carmel fire, and all of the fires that we've had down in Big Sur, they generally are on a one road system. So my guess is the zones are going to remain constant, right? You get your zone and that's what you're in. So there will be communication that can exist among people. But Ed, have you learned anything from the most recent evacuations about those single road circumstances that we should be conscious of?
Yeah, so I think there's some concern that the zones are fixed in a way that is detrimental. And so we intend on having them be the same zones. However, there is the ability to modify the zones depending on how the incident is impacting them. So say you have a large zone and only half or a quarter of it really needs to be evacuated. We have the ability to modify them and break them out. Say it's C22, splitting it into say C22-A, C22-B, so that we can get a bit more granular, but they don't really change all that much. I will say that when in the plan, you'll notice the things that go into the consideration of which areas need to be evacuated are the single egress points. And I think one of the things that Gary kind of touched over at the end was the footballs, quote unquote, that we're planning on developing. Part of that is an evaluation of those evacuation routes. So for each of the zones, there's that analysis of the actual routes, the width of the roadway, additional egress points off of that main arterial to provide the incident commander and law enforcement with all the information to make that decision. Do we need to expand the evacuation area to the adjacent zone because they don't have egress as well? And you saw that during the Colorado fire, was areas beyond the fire that maybe necessarily weren't in the immediate impact zone being evacuated because there was no secondary route.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this report. It was really good. And we could go on for hours because I know all of us have questions and you've got answers, which is just terrific. Let me see quickly if there's any member of the public that wishes to make any questions or comment. I'm not seeing any hands on Zoom. I'm not seeing any people coming forward. So I'm going to recommend and make a motion that we adopt the resolution approving the Monterey County Emergency Operations Program.
Second.
Thank you very much. Could we have a roll call vote, please?
Supervisor Alejo,
Aye.
Supervisor Phillips.
Aye.
Supervisor Lopez,
Aye.
Supervisor Askew,
Aye.
and Chair Supervisor Adams.
Aye. Thank you. Thanks very much. And with that, we're going to close item number
Madam Chair,
22.
before we move on, can I make one just tiny statement? I just hope that we will include a statement within this document that says that there is no inherent additional risk for the zones, because I don't want this to be used in the future by insurance companies to, say, well, you're in this zone and the county determines that it is a higher risk. So I think if we put that caveat statement in front of the document, it may make sure that that never becomes a tool that's used against our constituents. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
So
That's great.
Supervisors, to clarify, what your point is that the zones are not indicative of fire risk
Dangerous.
or danger or
Correct.
risk. Okay.
No.
Correct.
No,
Zone 1 isn't any more dangerous than zone 20.
correct.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very, very much. So let's see what we have here. Can you tell us, were there any new referrals?
No new referrals this week, Madam Chair.
And I think we have some referral responses.
We do. We have several referral responses. The first response is item number 25, which is from your Chief Executive Officer of Natividad, Dr. Chad Harris, about naming it Natividad Medical Center something after Barbara Shipnock, former supervisor. When I see Andrea Rosenberg joining him, ably assisted.
Afternoon, members of the board and chair and members of the public. I'm happy to give a report if somebody wants to add me to the participant roster. That'd be great. I have a brief presentation. So while that's coming up and then we can move forward, I just want to remind everybody that this is a board referral 2022.13 for a request for Natividad to name a portion of the hospital after Barbara Shipnock and develop a policy to address the naming opportunities at Natividad. I will share my screen. Well, first, I wanted to just show a quick picture there. That is Barbara Shipnock. And actually, more remarkably, that's actually at the groundbreaking for Natividad Medical Center in 1994. We were actually looking at some archived areas in our library, and we came across this. It's pretty fascinating to see the folks at that groundbreaking in 1994, and we thought it was obviously apropos, both indicative of her role at Natividad Medical Center and also some historical context there. So some key things to recognize here. Appreciate again Supervisor Adams and Ruth Askew and family and friends of Barbara Shipnock having requested that a portion of the hospital be named after Barbara Shipnock, and to recognize her great work that she did while serving as the first woman elected to Monterey County Board of Supervisors representing District 2. She held this position from 1979 till 1994. And also recognizing Barbara realized early that the health of the county hospital, i.e. Natividad Medical Center, was critical to making quality health care available to all Monterey County residents, regardless of their ability to pay. And this was at a time when many counties in the state were actually closing their county hospitals. And Barbara fought vigorously to keep Natividad open. Barbara also was instrumental in creating the Natividad Foundation and also our Board of Trustees at Natividad in 1989. One again, bit of history that I was trying to understand why, because it was an interesting number, but there are 11 members on the Board of Trustees, but she actually is the person that established that our current structure as well as our Board of Trustees. Barbara Shipnick was also, her leadership was critical in securing funding for Natividad's modern campus and building. Of note, negotiating certificates of participation back in New York City and Wall Street. And key and core is we, Natividad, agree with the recommendation and also recognize the need to develop a formal process and a county policy outlining the process and criteria for naming facility programs at county-owned Natividad Medical Center. And with that, I'll hand it over to Andrea Rosenberg, Natividad's Assistant Administrator.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. So this policy will establish the criteria and the guidelines for Natividad's Board of Trustees, the Board of Supervisors Capital Improvement Committee, as well as the Board of Supervisors in the naming process. I think it's important to note that the Board of Supervisors is the only body authorized to convey naming rights to publicly owned facilities. So we recognize that, and the policy will recognize that as well. The policy will also address Natividad's unique needs to respond appropriately to significant gifts that we receive through various donations, as well as to public requests to posthumously honor extraordinary individuals such as somebody like Barbara Shipnuck. Once this policy has been approved by the Board of Supervisors, Natividad will bring forward to the Board of Supervisors the request to name a portion of Natividad Medical Center in memory of Barbara Shipnuck. I'd like to briefly go through the project timeline, lots of different committees that we'll be going through. The first item, again, is to establish the naming policy that will address both the philanthropic and honorific naming opportunities that could occur at Natividad. We have already reviewed the policy, the draft policy, with the Natividad Board of Trustees on April 8th. We are planning to seek support from the Capital Improvement Committee the upcoming May meeting on May 9th, and then following that with Board of Supervisors approval the following day on the 10th. Following that, we would come back to recommend the naming a building or portion of a building at Natividad after Barbara Shipnuck. Again, we received a recommendation from the Board of Trustees. We tried to hammer that all out in our April meeting that we had with the Board of Trustees on the 8th of April. So we have received that recommendation already. And then we will go back to the Capital Improvement Committee on the 13th of June, and then the following day to the Board of Supervisors to seek approval. So how much might this cost? The total cost of this project really will be dependent on the style, material type, and quantity of signage utilized. The cost, which includes signage and installation, can really vary pretty greatly, from approximately $20,000 to $50,000. The cost of the project will be funded from Natividad's Enterprise Fund.
And again, to recap, Natividad's recommendation is to move forward on the policy and naming as described. And we would, of course, welcome any alternative direction provided to staff. And of course, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Let me just see if there are any questions.
I just want to say thank you for taking this referral and running with it. I've learned so much more about former Supervisor Shipnuck as a result of the research that you've been able to find, and I think it's an appropriate way to honor someone who really was at the foundation of, or built the foundation for, the hospital that continues to thrive and serve our residents today. So I would move that we support the.
I think we're actually just receiving a preliminary analysis today.
Okay.
So there won't be any action that we would take.
Okay. Well, no alternate action.
It's coming forward. It'll be coming back to us.
Okay. Well, that works. Mr. Phillips.
Yeah, looking back at history, but I was there at the time when we had the dedication, and I worked with her a lot as a presiding judge. But and I actually had a glass of wine with her the last day she worked. We went out for a glass, but you're right. I mean, she was a moving force, she and Sam Karras on the hospital, because at that time, everybody was advising you to get out of the hospital business if you're a county. And that was there was a big force in Monterey County that was recommending against building that hospital. So she was a key moving force in that. So thank you for your.
Thank you. And I do not see any additional hands up from my colleagues. I too will just thank you. I had the privilege of knowing Barbara and worked with her on her first campaign to run for the Board of Supervisors. So it was always enjoyable to get to know her. And I really am very thankful this is coming forward because she deserves it. And that's really terrific. Is there any member of the public that wishes to make any comment on this item? Not seeing anyone in the chambers, and I see no hands raised. So with that, we will receive the preliminary analysis with the deep gratitude to you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
And now we'll go to item number 26, which is to receive a status update on board referral number 2017.24 for consultant options to consolidate the youth center with the new juvenile hall and repurpose 970 Circle Drive and provide direction to staff.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair, members of the board. Bella Lessick, analyst for the County Administrative Office, here to provide a very brief verbal status update on Supervisor Alejo's 2017-24 referral on options to retain an independent consultant to consolidate the youth center with juvenile hall and repurpose 970 Circle Drive. I will summarize the history and touch on possible next steps before seeking direction from the board. In 2017, a senior project manager at Kitchell concluded co-location of the two facilities would require master planning and redesign of the new juvenile hall and another construction project. In 2018, the Board of State and Community Corrections determined after a site visit that it could statutorily be possible to co-locate detained and committed youth in one facility with additional staffing. Since 2019, probation has continued to review the possibility of consolidating the two facilities and provided periodic status updates to the referral. Concerns noted by the department include operational challenges to staggering programming and meals for low and high risk offenders in order to keep them separate to avoid potentially negative outcomes to rehabilitation. Capacity programming and space constraints were further exacerbated by two new developments. First, the descoping of the new juvenile hall construction project eliminated a long-term high security unit, classroom, kitchen, laundry, and dining area. Second, due to SB 823, which will close the Department of Juvenile Justice and realign states' responsibilities to counties, local facilities will now have to accommodate an older and higher risk population. That brings us to the current update to the referral. We reviewed similar projects for a dozen consultants in nearly as many counties and obtained several estimates from those familiar with juvenile codes and regulations. The most relevant and reasonable provided were all around $70,000 for an initial high-level assessment of feasibility of accommodating multiple risk groups in the juvenile hall. This would begin with a review of the current layout and configuration of housing and support spaces, operations and youth population data, and end with a determination that either the current juvenile hall capacity is sufficient with modified operations and programming, or that the facility needs to be modified or a new one built in order to meet current rehabilitation standards and needs of the youth, public, and staff. Any required structural modifications would exceed an initial assessment and necessitate additional investment in consultant work. And with that brief update, I welcome the board's direction.
Thank you for your report. I see Supervisor Alejo has his hand raised. Supervisor Alejo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know Salinas Council Member Orlando Osornio is in the audience there, and he's hoping to speak if you give him a chance because he has his 4 o'clock Salinas City Council meeting. But I did want to just thank the staff for finally bringing this thing forward. This was a referral originally filed by former Supervisor Simon Salinas and I in 2017. And I had allowed it to be delayed because of the construction issues at the new juvenile hall. But that's almost complete, and it's going to be done in the next few months. But I think this is a great time to have this conversation because there is now a renewed and sparked interest by the city of Salinas in looking to implement their Alisal vibrancy plan and looking to revitalize and reinvest in areas in that very neighborhood. In fact, Supervisor Askew and I and some of the mayor of Salinas and Councilmember Osornio just did a tour there last week of the youth center itself and then those properties that I'm talking about. But I think the biggest issue is that when Chief Parsons was here, I did a tour with her, and she had mentioned to me that the budget just to operate the youth center was about $13 million. And last week, we only had 21 youth incarcerated there, and that would come to a cost of about $619,000 per year per youth. And so it really begs the issue of doing a cost feasibility of consolidating funding. And I think it needs to be done very strategically as well, because it's easy to say the BHCC will not approve this funding if it's consolidated. We need to really have some expertise that, and I'm glad that the report that was just mentioned, that it is feasible to reconfigure. We do have different wings or pods at the new juvenile hall. And in fact, the youth that would normally go to DJJ, they already are being consolidated at the juvenile hall. Chief Keating had mentioned, I think it was on our budget committee, that change is already happening, that they're not going to the state youth prisons. In fact, they're being held now at the new juvenile hall. So that already has happened. The descoping was only an issue of budget overruns, but we know that only included one wing, a kitchen and a washroom and an eating area. Those are the only issues that were not completed, but certainly that could be part of a plan to add those facilities, as I know state funding is likely going to be possible for additional construction to finish the juvenile hall. The other thing I also wanted to make sure that we review is what is currently being provided today at the youth center in terms of instruction and programs, because we did a tour there last week, and I was kind of dismayed to hear a lot of statements that certain services were being funded, but we know that it's been a long time since those have happened. The bike repair program has been closed down for a long time. They took us to a wood shop. I know that's been closed for a long time. They planted some plants in the back of the juvenile hall to show like there was some kind of ag program. That obviously hasn't gone on for a very long time there. So in this evaluation, I want to make sure that we're getting accurate facts of what is being provided and whether those programs and instructional, educational, vocational programs could be transferred, because we have several new classrooms at the juvenile hall. And I think those could be certainly transferred over. And I don't want misinformation to kind of cloud the feasibility of making the change happen. And the third is also making sure that this could be a phased approach as the city looks to revitalize the area. This doesn't have to happen overnight. It could be a phased approach that really makes sense, that takes into the needs of the juvenile hall, but also where the city is in terms of the planning, and really bringing something special to the Alisal in this particular area on Sanborn and Circle. I'm excited about it. I would love to see this land and these resources being put to other good community uses, and also the funding that we could save and in terms of consolidated juvenile hall, that could go to more youth programs and perhaps alternative smaller housing sites that are not the traditional youth center and incarceration campus. And lastly, when we did the tour, and I would encourage all my colleagues to do a tour, that was originally an old hospital. It was designed to be a hospital. And if you walk through the hallways, and Supervisor Askew, I know would attest to this, that there's a lot of dead space there, a lot of empty halls, a lot of empty rooms, a lot of empty offices, big dorm rooms that are not being utilized. So a lot of that space at that youth center is not being used when there's only 21 youth there. And so as part of this, I would encourage my colleagues to take a visit, and you will see that it's eye-opening. There's a lot of empty space that is just not being utilized, and we could, I think, better serve the youth by consolidating at a modern facility and working to implement those pieces that were not completed during construction. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Alejo. Is there any member who would like to speak?
Is Todd Keating going to chat with us?
Let's see if the board wants to speak, and then we'll bring Todd up. Supervisor Phillips, have you any comments you'd like to make at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting we bring up Simon Salinas, because Simon Salinas and I were the ones that developed it. I was presiding judge and he was chair of the board, I think, at that time. If you just look at the numbers, the one I had was 29, 24. Yeah, you could consolidate. But it's obviously complicated by and the numbers are way down from what they were at the youth center at one time. But when they passed SB 823, and you got the youth authority people coming that were going to the youth authority for some 3, 4, 5 years, you can't put them in if you just can't look at the numbers. And if you're talking about a kid who's had his first offense and is in there for 20 days, you can't put him in contact with a hard-nosed gang member who's committed several murders. So, we have to realize you have to have separation in eating, education, recreation, and it would be different if they had built that high, because I know I talked to Chief Parsons at the time, the possibility if we had built that separate high security part of the facility initially, and when we ran into financial things, we dropped that. But then you have the additional thing of the food preparation and laundry. But I mean, you could fix that or find that. But if somehow we can sell that land to the city or sell it to things and use that funds to add an additional facility at the juvenile hall, that might be appropriate or might be feasible. But I think it's before I looked at it more, I'd like to hear what our
Right. Let's just see if we've got any questions that we
probation
want to do
officer
now.
has.
Thank you. Supervisor.
I do. Councilmember Orlando Sonia, do you have to leave it in a minute? Okay, I would.
So
pardon my
why
time
don't you
if
come on
that's-
up?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
I think he represents this particular area on the city council.
Right. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine.
I should have called you up.
It's fine. Good afternoon, Chair Adams and County Supervisors. My name is Orlando Osornio. I am a resident of Salinas and particular. I've been living in this neighborhood now for about 6 years. And when we were shopping around to be able to own our first home, this was identified as a pretty good place to be able to start a family. With that question always in the back of our minds that we live up the street from a youth center. So that was always something that was a topic in our household. Now, as a city council member representing the city of Salinas and this district, there has been the questions about what type of investments we want to see in the Alisal. Now, as we talk about the Alisal Vibrancy Plan, this would be a great opportunity to be able to first see if it's have a feasibility study to see what is the cost and to really get a good explanation of the services that are provided there. So I think that's a really good first step, and that's the reason that I'm here today, to just show my support about hopefully moving that forward. But secondly, when we do speak about the Alisal Vibrancy Plan, it would be a great addition to be able to also invest into that area, to be able to see also investments that are happening right next door with the behavioral health clinic that the County of Monterey has made such a great investment. So to be able to have that alongside maybe something else that we can redevelop in that area, I'm in full support of that. And that's the reason that I wanted to take some time to come and speak to you guys today. So I hope to hear the outcome of this decision. I thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to following and tracking this item. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your patience. And why don't we go ahead and have Todd Keating come forward?
Thank you, Chair
Hi.
Adams and members of the board. I'm Todd Keating, Chief Probation Officer. I think my views on the original referral have been made quite clear, and through a series of memos and comments I've made to the board. Supervisor Alejo has mentioned misinformation coming from, I suppose, my office. I disagree with that statement, and I would like to correct a couple of things that the supervisor said, and that would be that the
Last fiscal year, it was 9.9 million to run the youth center, 5.4 million of which was county general fund, and 7.8 million is staffing. So 13 million has been repeated several times. I just don't want any decision being made on that number. As far as the referral to go forward with a consultant to look into this issue, and if it's a situation of finding a new location to open up the youth center, or reconfiguring the current juvenile hall site, that would be the first step. If moving forward, for this to move forward at all, that would have to happen, because there would have to be an assessment of needs and infrastructure and the whole shoot and match. That being said, to shoehorn the programming that's going on at the youth center into juvenile hall right now, it would be a disaster. That's my opinion, and I do invite all the members of the board to come see the programming at the youth center, because I also disagree with his assessment, Supervisor Alejo's assessment of what's going on there. And I'll take questions.
Okay. Yes, Supervisor Askew.
Yeah. Do you have enough space and everything at the juvenile hall if you were going to add a separate facility, a more higher security facility? Do you have space at the complex of the juvenile hall, and would that be a feasible alternative?
There's a misconception when you look at the head count at both institutions and the number of beds. If the youth were sleeping 24 hours a day, no problem. We could accommodate them. But the daylight hours when programming, school, vocational training, and not to mention the 823 has raised the age that can be in each institution up to 25. I mean, the answer is no, not in its current configuration.
But is there room to add it?
That, if we had completed the original juvenile hall scope, that would have helped with 823, that issue of the DJJ youth coming back. I don't believe it necessarily, it may have been able to work to open up the youth center and, divvy up the property somehow. I don't know.
Thank you.
Supervisor Askew.
Thank you, and I appreciate your comments, Todd, and Chief Keating, and the memos and the conversations that we've had, and they've been really enlightening for me. I have had the opportunity to tour, not since it's been opened, but the juvenile hall, and then most recently the youth center campus. And I think it's clear to me, and I want to reiterate that we're not talking, for me, I don't think you've made it clear and your staff have made it clear that the types of children that are incarcerated at each location have very different needs, and our ability to meet their needs and provide them with their, to keep them safe and to keep them isolated from other risk situations, that there are very different populations. So it's not as simple as saying, oh, we have empty beds available, let's just put heads in beds kind of thing. So I appreciate that, because it helped me understand sort of what we're talking about. I also recognize that the nature of juvenile incarceration is changing, that we have different responsibilities being passed down to us, that what we're planning for could be looking different into the future, and that there is an expectation that we will continue to look at different solutions for how we rehabilitate and provide restorative treatment to some of our younger and less serious offenders. And so I'll back up. The ALSAL vibrancy plan, it identifies the area around where the youth center property is located, and there's some city land that backs up to that property. So the city is interested in understanding what types of development opportunities are available, and if and what the county might have planned for the future of those surrounding areas. So I think it would be
wise of us to understand what our options are in terms of utilizing the property around the juvenile hall to see if there is a way that it could be designed and built out so as to safely and appropriately accommodate the children that are currently or will in the future be assigned to the youth center, or if there are other alternative models of recovery that could be utilized for some of those children to reduce the headcount that's necessary for a youth center type program. So I'm interested in pursuing a study to understand what our options would be, but I want to be really clear that I'm not in any way suggesting that we just take heads and beds and move them, because I hear your staff and I hear the care and compassion that they have and what they put into ensuring the safety of our kids. So just to again ask the question, if we were to look at this with being really clear that we're not just simply talking about moving kids from one facility to another, could you support looking at studying the potential for something different? Is that something that you could be supportive of?
Yeah, my main support is with the activities and the programming that we provide at the youth center.
Okay.
The property itself,
Okay.
if we could relocate somewhere else that was viable, I'm all for that. And like I said earlier, a study would be necessary to do that.
Okay.
So I just want to make it clear as well as that my support for the study is that I'm good with that. The referral originally, I'm not good with that.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And I think I had hesitations as well until following the conversations and then recognizing that we really would need to be very thoughtful and intentional about any changes that we make. The other thing I just want to mention is that one of the discussions that we've had is the county is facing significant RENA requirements moving forward. And my understanding is that RENA credit goes to whoever approves a housing unit. And if housing units are proposed on county property, they do potentially get credited back to the county. So as we think about potential for that particular site, I know that there are many uses that would benefit a multitude of outcomes that we all want to see happen. So I'm supportive of the request to study the issue and working closely in partnership with our probation staff to understand what the needs are and how to best serve these kids who find themselves in pretty terrible situation.
Just a quick question. I worry about all of the referrals that we have derailing staff and the plans that the departments have. Would it take much of your or staff time to do this project, to do the the consultant sort of thing?
I mean, thinking back to when the needs assessment was done for the juvenile hall originally, way back when, I don't think it was overly intrusive on normal staff time.
And then would the $70,000 be coming out of your budget?
It will not be coming out of my budget.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know. I haven't considered that.
I guess that would be a question I would have to have answered. Where would the $70,000 for the study be coming from? And Supervisor Alejo, oh, wait, I see the budget man has his hand up. Perhaps he can answer, and then Supervisor Alejo, I'll come to you.
Yeah, yes, thank you for that, Supervisor Adams. I just wanted to confirm that these will have to be funded from cannabis revenue. At this point, cannabis assignment, that is the only revenue source that hasn't been tapped yet. And it'll be approximately 70,000 coming from cannabis assignment.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Who's
Vega.
going to pay it back?
Yeah, at a loan?
Yeah, I think we could pay it back when we have the tremendous savings that we're seeking through this consolidation many times over. But I wanted to respond to Chief Keating's, all respect to him, but I want to take a point of personal privilege, as my numbers were never disputed. The numbers I gave of 13 million was what Chief Parsons told me, whether it was accurate or not back in 2017. That is what she told me then, and they have not been disputed, even though I've said it numerous times. It was in my referral. And up until today, we're now Chief Keating saying it's a lower number, but even if it was at 11, that's $524,000 per youth. If it was at 10 million, that's $476,000 per youth. And when I was in the legislature, I was on the budget subcommittee that oversaw public safety, our prisons, our youth prisons, our court system. And I did a visit to Chad Youth Prison, where under the DJJ, where most of our Salinas youth went to. And the state was under heavy criticism back then because it was spending an average of $276,000 a year per youth at the DJJ at Chad. And then later there was efforts to reduce that even more. It was lowered to 200, but we're still way above what the state is spending to incarcerate one person per year. Imagine the types of services that we could give if we invest that in other best practices and models. And in fact, it's already being done. There seems to be a misperception here that consolidation would just happen. There's different wings, there's different pods, there's up to 80 beds, there's ways to separate populations. And in fact, it's already happening because Chief Keating in our budget meeting already said those sentenced to DJJ are already being at our juvenile facility. On re-envisioning something else, we're already doing that as well. When during our tour, we asked about young women offenders, girl offenders, and they're no longer at the youth center. And there's a program now that houses those female youth offenders. There's a nonprofit that has houses. There's an alternative placement for them. We should be looking at the lower level offenders, doing the same for lower level male offenders that don't have to be at the juvenile hall, that can free up space by providing alternative places for them to get rehabilitation, treatment, and education services. So there is models because we're already doing it with our female young offenders. And so I know when we've done something for so long, it's easy to want to just keep doing the same old thing and spending the same amount of dollars. But that is no longer the case in California. We're looking for best practices, better models, being more efficient, and trying to put money where it could have the greatest impact on our youth. We made great strides. That's a testament to probation, to our court system, to our judges that are and the nonprofits in our schools and after school programs. Our numbers of youth incarceration in Salinas and Monterey County have dropped dramatically, but there is more work for us to do. And because of that dramatic drop, we're in a place where we could look at what else can we re-envision and find efficiencies and better serve the youth of our communities. I wish Chief Keating would have come with us on that tour. It was his, he had two supervisors coming, representatives from the city of Salinas. It did become a lobbying effort. If you ask Charles McKee, he would agree. He was there. He heard what your staff said to us. And I get it. Chief Parsons was against this from the beginning. Chief Keating has been openly in opposition. That's why we're asking this to go through the CAO's office so that it's a neutral department within our county that could seek out the consultant and get the answers to our questions. But going back to Chief Parsons, even though she told me she opposed it, she said she herself told me so, at least on 2 occasions, that it was possible. That in fact, the D wing, which is one of the original, it was the newer and the only original wing of the prior juvenile facility, she had envisioned that as a possible place where the youth center youth could be located. So I've been on this for a long time. I've been patient. I'm trying to move this forward, but there is a need to get some accurate facts and information and analysis, and then have this board make that decision. And the $70,000 we're going to spend, it's going to end up saving us millions more, and being able to use those dollars to better serve the youth who really need those services in terms of rehabilitation, education, and intervention. And we have an opportunity to do something big for them, but also for East Salinas and the families of the LSL. Thank you.
Supervisor Lopez, you want to weigh in on this or no?
Having heard all the different positions, I'm comfortable moving forward with the analysis for 70,000. I think the only piece I haven't heard, which I do hope gets included, and I really appreciate Orlando or Councilmember Osornio coming in today and also talking to me ahead of time, is I'd like to make sure that the community, the surrounding community at the center gets engaged in some way, because I do think that their voice matters as we've improved forms of government, including local voice and as hyper local as we can get is important. And so understanding that there's an opportunity here to have a conversation and analyze whether or not this is possible in a way that does save us money. I'm all for that at the price tag that's been proposed. So that's where I stand today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem about moving forward with the $70,000 for the study. So.
I'm kind of torn about it because what I dislike is going against the experts. You know, I dislike going against staff that are doing this work every single solitary day. I appreciate Supervisor Alejo's enthusiasm and interest in this, but you know, we're talking about like Marcia and Todd, who it's what they do every single solitary day, and I cannot help but feel that their approach is going to be better formed than those of us who are on the outside looking in at this point. $70,000 is $70,000. And, you know, we've overspent that cannabis money 100 times at this point. I have a feeling, though, that there's enough support on the board to go ahead and do the $70,000 research to see if it's feasible. The other thing is that building, the juvenile hall was such a, I have to watch my words again. I'm not going to offend anybody today again. It was such a nightmare with the building problems that we had putting that building up, that the mere thought of touching that building just terrifies me, because it was like cha-ching, 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 millions and millions and millions of dollars. And the very thought of touching that building makes me most uncomfortable. If everybody feels like it's a great idea to spend $70,000 of non-existent cannabis money to do the study, I'll go along with that. But I am hopeful that it isn't going to take too much of your time or your staff's time to do this. So I think at this point, I don't know that we take, at this time, I don't believe that we take votes. I think we simply give action or to recommend direction and public comment. Forgive me.
I think on this one we do, Madam Chair, because it is a decision to spend $70,000 to move forward on a consultant to do this independent feasibility study.
Yeah, and the referral response title asks for a direction to staff on this issue.
So that would require a vote.
Correct.
Okay. Is there any member of the public that would like to make comments on this item? Okay, we see two hands raised. First is Cesar Lara. Cesar Lara, if you can please unmute yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, members of the Board of Supervisors. I have a lot to say on this issue. First of all, been a neighbor to the youth center for the last 14 years as the director of the Labor Council and a Teamster member, and was also one of not just a participant of the Alice Sovereignty Plan, but one of the architects to actually get it started. And many conversations have been had by community members on looking at the youth center and repurposing it and looking at it as a location for opportunity and rehab. SB 823 did change the landscape. This referral came forward in 2017, and part of it is a lot of counties have downsized their facilities to the point where the state is downsizing by shutting down DJJ. And working at Milpa, we've done direct programming at Chad and have talked to participants and have staff that have been at the youth center before, and that location could be better used. But also, to Mary Adams' point, when SB 23 came about, as a state, they said, let's look at this differently. Let's look at it as a health model. Let's start a new department in the Health and Human Services and not just in the traditional BSEC model. And I'm not proposing that we shoehorn in and just move youth center participants into the new juvenile hall, but actually look at a holistic way of doing it, to really look at it through a health model and really doing this right. And so even though I share some of the comments by Mary Adams about looking at that building because so many mistakes were done in the construction side. Definitely don't hire the same construction firm to look at the changes. But you know, definitely let's look at this issue and really look forward to the Board of Supervisors looking at this issue because it's been on the table for a while and it's fiduciary responsibility of the board to use the money wisely. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have Bernie Gomez. If you could please press *6 to unmute yourself. There we go.
Okay, good afternoon, Madam Chair and Board. Yeah, just, you know, Madam Chair, you feel sometimes kind of hesitant going against the experts. And I would want to ask even Todd Keaton, the chief, right? How many of these youth, does he know how many of these youth that DJJ will be coming back? You know, if not, you know, why not? You know, there's DJJs being closed through attrition, meaning some of these kids are going to be potentially, if not terming out from their sentence, right? So it's not like all 30 plus kids are going to come back directly. It'd be good to know how many of these, if the probation department has done any, has engaged that to see how many kids are coming back, right? How many, what that plan is going to look like. At the end of the day, I think this is a great opportunity to start thinking about descoping and decarcerating the youth center. Even having the title of youth center is kind of offensive when you're talking about barbed wire and concrete, you know, surrounding kids. You know, a youth center is supposed to be somewhere where you get to have fun, you know, have mentors, right? Do schoolwork, you know, all those things, you know. So even thinking about a youth center, right? How about we have this, we convert, repurpose and refurbish this facility and turn it into like some type of positive family zone or something where these 20 plus kids are there for low level offenses actually get to go home, right? Instead of being locked up and actually go into this new facility, right? Where there's vocation training, education, right? Where they're, instead of sitting there having programs, right? Run through probation, instead of having, you know, just, they get to go to a place where they get to learn and they get to go home and just vice versa, right? Just back and forth, you know, and just creating a more upward mobility and propping these kids up and helping to correct their pathways, mistakes, right? All those things.
Thank you so much for your comments, Bernie. And time is out. And taking our next person, who is Sergio Sanchez. If you want to press star mute, yeah, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Sergio.
Thank you. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and Supervisors. Sergio Sanchez, former council member. And I only say that not because I want to hear, but I served 10 years in city council. And this was an issue that was always discussed at our level, that we wanted to see something different at that place. Back then, kids were marching in gear and just to paint a picture for you, this is in front of houses where a lot of kids have grown up and other adults, and they would see incarcerated youth like themselves. But also we have a funeral home down the street, and we also have a garbage dump down the street, and talk about inequities and social injustices, because I know none of you would support or continue to maintain a facility, a prison for children or for young people, or funeral homes, or even garbage dumps. So this is timely, and we started talking about getting rid of that place and putting something different. The city started acquiring a lot of the properties around it, but now it is what it is. And so I really appreciate the leadership from those out there supporting, and glad that we're getting to this point where we're actually talking about doing something better for our community. Every day when every kid wakes up, they should not be seeing incarcerated people or even funeral homes, any of those things. So we gotta, whatever we can do as government to make better spaces for people, that's much better. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the support and the leadership on this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. And now we have the Milpa Collective. Please press *6 to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
You'll have to speak a bit louder.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, cool. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Rosaura Figueroa Mendoza. I'm with Milpa, and I just want to support the consolidation of the youth center with the juvenile hall. I think more than anything, we're wanting to end mass incarceration and have a conversation around that. And also being able to understand that locking children in cages or putting them in a space of barbed wire, concrete walls, a place where their imagination and their inspiration is not being cultivated is really damning for us, for the children, for the families. And so any way that we are able to facilitate the process of getting arts, getting recreation, getting positive, healthy role models for the children, and actually having it be a youth center is always a great way to be able to go about things. And so I just appreciate the space to be able to speak on this issue, but also being able to challenge ourselves to think about how we do things when it comes to incarcerating children, right? We don't have to continue down the same path. We can actually create ways and models for our children to be able to be inspired and to move forward and to actually have the resources that they need from the very beginning, from the very start, to be able to be the people that they want to be, right? That are going to be positive and moving forward and be leaders in the community. And so I just appreciate, again, this topic, and I'm glad that it's finally on the agenda. I know that I've been at MILPA 2 years, and we've been talking about like doing this for 2 years. And so, and even like the gentleman that spoke before me said he's been on city council and they've been talking about it. So we need to move forward in such a way where we are thinking about kids and their well-being, and that we're investing in them as opposed to seeing them as criminals or seeing them as like they're doing something wrong, right? So again, thank you for your time and appreciate the chance to speak.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Edgar Ibarra.
Hello, buenas tardes. My name is Edgar Ibarra. I'm the leadership and program coordinator at MILPA and a longtime resident of both Monterey County and Santa Cruz County. I've lived interchangeably in between the Pájaro area, but neither here nor there. And I really just want to first start off by thanking the leadership of Luis Alejo for remaining steadfast, always pushing the issue on this and keeping it right there. And you know, in the board's mind, right in front of, and making sure that this is something that we talked about and it never went back or got lost somewhere in some sort of shelf. Consolidating the juvenile hall and the youth center is extremely important. The state of California is dramatically shifting and moving it in a different direction as far as how we deal with troubled young people who are asking for help, who are literally reaching out for help and through their actions at times, and sometimes make some terrible choices, you know. And so as Monterey County continues to explore this possibility of creating, I really want that not just the consolidation is explored, but also like what are some of the best practices that we've seen, not just in the state, but throughout the country, and not just, but also even in the country and other countries. I know New Zealand has done very, very different, implemented different practices, but just knowing that there is different examples that we can operate from. And again, just uplifting the young people, but also incorporating them in the conversation. If that were to happen, like what would that look like? You know, incorporating the parents, you know. And I think that's really, really important to uplift and involve the community in this conversation, since it's going to be big, you know. And it's also the reallocation of resources, which people are not going to like. And we also got to, again, have those tough conversations of what do we want to budget? You know, what do we want to value? Or we want to uplift the young people, the next generation who are going to lead our cities and counties on that. So thank you for what.
Thank you very much for your comments. I appreciate them. And with that, I think we will come back then, and we will need to have a board vote. I don't think there's anyone in the chambers that is coming forward to speak. So if I can gather our people back together again, we will have a board vote to determine whether we will move forward with our $70,000 consultant on item number 26. Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, I make a motion to approve.
Thank you.
And I'll second that. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion. Thank you, Supervisor Alejo, and a second by Supervisor Askew. Could we please have a roll call vote?
Supervisor Alejo?
Aye.
Supervisor Phillips?
Aye.
Supervisor Lopez?
Aye.
Supervisor Askew?
Aye.
And Chair Supervisor Adams?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.
I'm going to ask everyone to just hold on for a minute. You know, I'm going to ask the support of the board at this point. We have another item that is a very important item that we need to bring forward. And I would like to propose that we take items number 27, 28, and 29 and postpone them till another meeting, whether hopefully next week, but I've not seen the agenda, so I'm not clear. But in order to be able to do that, I need to have a motion from the board to postpone items number 27, number 28, and number 29.
I'll move that we.
The clerk is looking quite nervous.
Wanted to share next week's agenda, and I don't want to change it. It's a small agenda, so those items would be a good idea to add on May 3rd.
Thank you so much for that.
And
Okay.
I'll move that we table 27, 28, and 29 to our next meeting.
Thank you very much. And is there a second to that?
Second.
Please, thank you very much. And could we please get a roll call vote?
Supervisor Alejo,
Aye.
Supervisor Phillips,
Aye.
Supervisor Lopez,
Aye.
Supervisor Askew,
Aye.
and Chair Supervisor Adams.
Aye. Okay, and now with that, I am going to go to the County Administrative Officer comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few comments today. First, I want to congratulate the Pebble Beach Company on their recent announcement on some additional collaborations with the U.S. Open, USGA. Just it sounds like a great opportunity for Pebble Beach to have the U.S. Open here more frequently. It looks like about every 5 years as opposed to the 10 plus that it's happened in the past. And that's a big thing for Monterey County. Another item I'd like to announce is that, or remind everybody, this is Administrative Professionals Week and Administrative Professionals Day is tomorrow. So please go out and thank all the administrative professionals out there that help us make our lives basically doable here in Monterey County and make us a success. I know that Karina Bokanovich is no longer my executive assistant, but she's been certainly invaluable to everything I do here in Monterey County. And then the other, tomorrow is also something called Denim Day. Denim Day started after 1998 when a Supreme Court in Italy decided that a rape conviction should be overturned because a woman was wearing tight jeans. So tomorrow, everybody should wear denim and in support and recognition of women's rights and the right to be free from that kind of harassment. So do that. So finally, I'd like to announce that after 31 years in local government, I am going to retire at the end of this calendar year. It has been quite a run, and I really appreciate all the support and outpouring of appreciation that I've already received that's come through the email. I sent out an email recently to the whole county community, and it's been overwhelming to say the least. Something I will certainly miss is the people here in Monterey County. They've been remarkable. It certainly made me a success. It wasn't me by myself. Certainly the team here is what makes it the best. I started in local government in the small DA's office when I was in law school, interning in a DA's office. And that's kind of how I got my start with the connection with local government and realized quickly that it was the place to make changes. And I've been honored to be part of local government throughout California. I've been in two cities and 3 counties, and by far, no offense to the rest of them, but Monterey County has been the best, and the people here have been spectacular. Yes, the scenery is certainly to respect and almost die for, but the people in Monterey County, the employees of Monterey County, the community, the public have been what have made it so special. I've been blessed by having coworkers, colleagues throughout the organization that have come through, supported me, made me look like I know what I'm doing, which is a nice thing. I've had a lot of board members help me throughout my career. The Board of Supervisors has been nothing but spectacular since I started in 2003 here. It's been quite an enjoyable ride, and something that will certainly help propel me into the future. I'm not sure what the future holds for me. As most of you know, I like to do a lot of outdoor activities, and Monterey holds a lot of that opportunity for me to continue to do those things. But I also like to challenge myself professionally and intellectually, and I know there's some opportunities here, both in volunteer opportunities to help others, as well as intellectually, just to keep the mind going. So I'm not leaving yet. The time is hopefully at least through December of this year, and I look forward to those last several months helping Monterey County be as successful as possible. And I look forward to helping whoever comes after me build on what we've created. And it's been a real pleasure working with every one of you and everyone in Monterey County. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Charles. It's still pretty hard to digest this. There's no question about it. Even though you told me in advance, it still is like a what? But I'll go to my colleagues first for their comments, and then I'll wrap up my comments at the end, and we'll go by order. So I'll start with Supervisor Alejo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I know this is coming to a surprise to our 5,000 plus employees, many of our community members, our department heads, and many community leaders. I think most people who have had the honor and opportunity to work with Mr. McKee would tell you he's an utmost professional and somebody who really cares deeply about the people of Monterey County. And I want to say that famous line by Dr. King, you said that the true measure of a person is not where you stand in times of comfort or convenience, but where you stand in times of challenge and controversy. And over these last 2 most challenging years, I think Charles has really been a great leader during a tremendous storm. And he has also, it's not only him, but he has some great department head leaders and the leaders within the county that have really helped us as a team really navigate this storm and really deliver, and never forgetting the most vulnerable within our communities. And I just wanted to express how saddened I am by this news. And I know we pushed him to try to stay as long as he can, at least till the end of the year, which I am grateful for. It gives this board an opportunity to be very thoughtful and have a process without being rushed to find somebody to succeed him, to also be another great leader for Monterey County. So on behalf of the people of Salinas, and on behalf of the youth, our farm workers, our working families in my district, I know they are grateful, because every single opportunity, every single decision, I know Mr. McKee was always very thoughtful to look out for the least among us. And when we do that, we lift up everyone else in our society. So I just want to say thank you, Charles. And I always say you can't ask more from a person such as yourself, a public servant such as yourself, who has given it all for the people and communities all across this great county. So we're very grateful. Thank you, and thank you for hanging in there a little bit more to give us this opportunity to find our next great leader. Appreciate it, brother.
Thank you. Supervisor Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, this isn't the way we, any of us wanted to see our day end. As we all know, no one's irreplaceable, but I think Charles McKee comes closer than anybody I know. He's been a dominant part of our county's leadership team over the past 2 decades, both as a county council and as chief administrator officer. His low-key approach to leadership and his problem solving renders him a very effective leader. And for me, it's been a privilege to work with you for the past 8 years, and we wish you well.
Thank you. Supervisor Lopez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I've got this thing that I do, and I know I'm going to have to make a tough speech or make some comments where I try to read everything I can, think about all the tough issues, and then come back at the end, and whatever sticks most is what comes out of my mouth. And since Charles let me know that he was making this decision, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what I should say when the time came, and we're here in the moment now, and I don't have words. I'm so excited for you, Charles, to take on the new challenges that you deserve and have earned. And at the same time, for me, it feels like I'm losing a whole hand, because since I started at the county as an intern, your door was open to me. And I know I shared that same story when we appointed you as CAO. You know, you always, even as the top attorney for the county, for me as a recent college grad, your door was open. I could come over, knock, sit down, and get advice about, you know, my life trajectory, the things I was thinking of doing, the things that I felt as challenges. And so I don't have any other words right now besides the fact that I'm excited for you and I'm appreciative of all you've given to every single resident of Monterey County. And I know that I'll have another 6 months to think about what I'll say. When the time comes, it will actually have to see your final day, but excited for you, happy for you. And at the same time, sad that, you know, we're losing really one of the strongest leaders Monterey County has ever seen in the positions that you've held as CAO and as CA and as county council. So thank you for all that you've given us.
Thank you, Supervisor Lopez. Supervisor Rudescu.
Thank you. So I stepped in last year, Charles. We were in the middle of a pandemic, and I know that that was not the role that I had signed up for. And I know that that was not the role that you had signed up for either. When I mean, it was the roles we signed up for, but it wasn't the situations that we'd signed up for. And I am so grateful that I got to serve in that space with you. I've learned so much from the very honest and real conversations that we have had. I appreciate that I can say whatever's on my mind to you and that you receive it and say, I hope, whatever's on your mind back to me. Our county is stronger as a result of having had the leadership and continuity of leadership that you've provided us. And you will be missed. And as my colleagues have said, we want what's best for you as for all of our employees and all of our staff and all of our partners. And hope that you'll stay nearby and stay in touch. But our community is stronger and healthier and safer as a result of having you at the helm through these past couple of years. We appreciate.
Thank you. Well, obviously, I concur with everything that my colleagues have said here today. I know that this is embarrassing to you, but not so much that you don't want more. So I can go ahead. Truthfully, it's going to be very different here without you. And I'm very thankful that in very typical fashion, you thought about others before yourself by giving us a nice long timeline, which will make the transition should allow for a very smooth transition. One of the things that I appreciated about you is that your role as county council was just known throughout the state. You were so active in not just in CSAC, but in other organizations as well. People really knew your name. And I know that you did quite a bit to help so many people who work in positions like we do, because you set the policy, and that was really wonderful. So I'm going to the intellectual challenging part that I know you like that you did. When I first was here, you were county council, and again, you just were so patient with me. It was my first year in elective office, and I was, also chairing the board first year out, not unlike what Wendy had done. And as county council, you just, as where Susan was sitting, you were just right there for me, and on the spot, I could just go to you so easily, and it was really really wonderful. So I'm going back in time just a bit to say how much I appreciated all of the things that you brought to bear in the role that you played there. In fact, I feel in the work that you've done as the CAO, I can appreciate and understand that role even more, because that's what I did throughout my whole career as president and CEO of organizations. And I know the things that it takes to do the job well. And you've done those things. You've done those things to be able to rely on your staff, to empower your staff to move forward, and not to sit there on top of them hoping that they're going to do the right thing, but trusting them that they will do the right thing. You've really done so much of that. you've got a great sense of humor, which is why I was able to talk about your wanting just a little bit more accolades. That's good. And I won't go on forever. But I think one of the things that I think is really important about you in your life, and that's that you were raised with a whole passel of sisters, 5, if I'm not mistaken. And therefore, I think you have a more advanced outlook on life. So with that, I wish you well. I want to know what to do to support you, truthfully. And I don't know whether you want us to say, oh, go, spread your wings, fly, or if you want us to say, oh, no, please stay here. It's hard to know, but I just want you to know that I'm sure I speak for the entire board and all of the other employees in the county that we do want the best for you. You make your choice, and we're here with you. You've trained us well, and you'll leave us all with a big smile on our face because of what the good things that you've done.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and all board members. I do appreciate the comments, and I guess the best thing you could do is another 8 months of those kinds of comments. That's what I'll ask for. But we do have another 8 months, and we'll hopefully get some good candidates in to come behind me and continue building what we've started. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to ask for a readout from closed session by County Council.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say on behalf of the County Council's office what a privilege and an honor it has been to work with you, Charles. So on that note, reading out from closed session, the board approved a tentative agreement with the Deputy Sheriff's Association and approved a side letter regarding trilingual pay with labor units F, H, J, and K. And that's it from closed session.
Thank you very much, County Council, and a special thank you to Semi Lopez today for the work that she did. You did a great job. Thank you so much for all your hard work today. Always thanks to Mr. Silas for your excellent translation services today. And with that, we will adjourn. Thank you very much.
Happy retirement, Charles.